The weight of 365 years, not days, not seasons, but full grinding centuries, presses upon the lone figure, yet his hand remains impossibly steady. The basalt chisel bites deeply into the weathered face of the cypress wood, carving a single austere vertical line. The sound, a sharp talk of stone against dense timber, rings out with unnerving clarity in the utter silence of the cliff cave, deliberate, sharp, and profoundly final. Ancient hands guide the tool, skin like dried parchment stretched taut over bone. Veins map the geography of ages, a labyrinth tracing centuries of relentless pulse. The fingers tremble now, subtly, but their work is continuous. A solitary, monolithic figure sits cross-legged near the shadowed mouth of the sheer cliff cave, the wooden reckoning tablet resting flat on his knees. Below him, the vast valley sprawls, sinking into the bruised colors of twilight. Scattered campfires glow below, faint and sparse, flickering like the final, dying breaths of distant stars. Smoke rises, thin and blue, from a world he once knew, a world he now observes only as an incomprehensible ruin. His eyes, the color of desert dust and time, scan the darkening horizon. They have catalogued the birth and decay of empires, seen them rise as monuments of dust and crumble back to the earth's surface. They have watched whole lineages, children becoming grandparents, who then return to the dust themselves, and still, impossibly, they see. Why would the Creator burden one man with breath for nearly a millennium while every soul he ever loved dissolved into ash? What apocalyptic secret was Methuselah safeguarding that necessitated a life spanning 969 years? What unbearable knowledge made him the final, terrified witness before the world was drowned by water and judgment? In the next hour, you will grasp the terrifying truth. The longest life ever recorded was never a blessing or a reward. It was a ticking countdown, and you will understand why your own years, however fleeting, carry the same sacred, terrible weight. His finger traces one last, unmarked space on the dark wood, waiting. If this history grips your spirit, subscribe and activate the notification bell, because the knowledge we unveil changes everything you believe about time. The vast expanse of the wheat field, rippling like liquid gold under the nascent sun, smelled of honest sweat and fertile black earth. 40 years weighed lightly on Methuselah. His hands, thick with the calluses of a dedicated harvestman, held the sickle resting idle. He knelt in the rich soil, a man ordinary in every visible way. Strong-backed, a dedicated husband, father to young Lamech, a man fluent in the severe rhythm of the seasons and the comforting weight of honest labor. Yet one thing set him apart, the silent, terrifying vigil being held by his father. Enoch stood motionless at the field's edge, face tilted sharply toward the empty expanse of the sky, as if attending to a conversation conducted just beyond the register of human hearing. 3 days now. 3 days Enoch had stood like this, rejecting sustenance, refusing the relief of sleep, speaking only in disjointed, alarming fragments that formed no coherent sense. The other workers, passing with heavy bundles of harvested grain balanced on their shoulders, whispered, their voices pitched low with dread. He's doing it again. An older man shook his head, his face etched with disapproval. Won't eat. Won't even speak a word to his own wife and children. A woman leaned close to her companion, shielding her mouth. My sister says the priest believes he sees demons, that he has been tainted by something unclean. Methuselah felt the crushing weight of their stares, the palpable fear. They now meticulously avoided passing too close to him, as if this unique brand of madness might be borne on the wind, contagious. He rose slowly, brushing the clinging dirt from his tunic and knees, and crossed the expanse of the field toward his father. His heart hammered in his ribs with each heavy step, not from the physical effort, but from something deeper. Perhaps fear, perhaps the strange, sickening certainty that the very ground beneath his feet was about to shift into an unrecognizable landscape. Father. The word came out softer than intended, a hesitant plea against the silence. Enoch did not turn. His body was unnaturally rigid, hands hanging loose and heavy at his sides. His eyes locked on a point far beyond the pale, cloudless morning sky. When Enoch finally spoke, the sound was guttural, dredged from a reservoir deeper than human memory, as if his larynx had become a conductor for primordial truths, reaching places human voices were never meant to access. They are preparing the path. They come for me soon. Who is coming, Father? Tell me. The messengers. Those forged in the crucible between lightning and absolute silence. The ones whose steps never defile the dust of this earth. Enoch's lips barely moved, the confession issuing forth like steam. I can hear their song now, a vibration in the air. It is almost time. A chill, bone deep, ran down Methuselah's spine, overwhelming the morning heat. He lifted his hand, intending to reach out and anchor his father with a touch to the shoulder, but he instinctively recoiled. The air surrounding Enoch felt fundamentally different. Charged, heavy, like the pregnant instant before a massive storm breaks the tension. Father, you are terrifying everyone. The village elders are gathering. They want to summon the priests. Please come home. Eat something, find rest. But Enoch's gaze remained fixed, unblinking, on the heavens. And Methuselah noticed, for the first time, that his father's lips were moving in a continuous, rapid stream. Soundless words, endless, as if reciting a text memorized before the world's creation. Was it scripture, a frantic prayer, or something terrifyingly else? Father, please at least tell me what sight holds you captive. For the first time in 3 days, Enoch's eyes broke away from the sky. His gaze met his son's, and Methuselah nearly stumbled back. They were his father's eyes. He recognized the color, the precise shape, but behind them now lay an impossible, terrible depth. A vast, cold knowing. I see the Genesis and the Terminus standing together, shoulder to shoulder. I see great mercy and terrible judgment exchanging a final kiss. And I see your face, my son, when you are older than the mountains themselves. What does that mean? But Enoch had already pivoted, returning his full attention to the sky, and the fleeting moment of human connection was abruptly shattered. That night, Methuselah lay wide awake in his tent, listening to the steady, oblivious breathing of his wife beside him and the soft snores of his young son in the corner. Sleep was an impossible luxury. He kept reliving his father's face, that strange, awful radiance, that terrible, monumental stillness. The words echoed in the cold chambers of his mind, older than mountains. What variety of delirium spoke such things? Finally, he rose, careful not to disturb his sleeping family, and stepped out into the cool, star-pricked darkness. The camp was settling into the low hum of night, disturbed only by the distant, familiar crackling of dying hearth fires and the occasional plaintive bleat of a restless goat. His father's tent sat noticeably apart from the others, as it had for the past month. Methuselah had dismissed it then, knowing Enoch often sought deep solitude for private prayer. But now, the tent glowed with lamplight, a frantic, unsettling beacon in the oppressive darkness. Methuselah hesitated at the entrance, his hand hovering over the coarse flap. A powerful instinct urged him to turn back, to retreat to his wife's familiar warmth and simply wait for a morning that would hopefully be ordinary. But he could not. Whatever consuming darkness had seized his father, whatever truth was being unveiled, he was compelled to know. He pulled the flap aside. Enoch knelt on the ground, surrounded by scores of clay tablets, scattered like leaves after a cyclone. He was writing with such desperate, frantic intensity that his entire frame shook, sweat dripping visibly from his brow despite the cool night air. The clay was covered in symbols that defied visual comprehension. A script not meant for human retina or memory, twisting in ways that seemed to drain the light from the air. This was the language of the threshold, recorded by a man who was already half gone. The fragile stylus in Enoch's hand trembled so violently it snapped clean in half. The sound was sharp in the small space, a crack like a delicate bone breaking. His father registered nothing, immediately picking up another stylus from a nearby pile and resuming his furious recording, his lips moving in that same soundless, perpetual recitation. Father. Enoch's head jerked up. His eyes were alarmingly wet, the rims red and hollowed by total exhaustion. Dark circles hung beneath them, vast and purple like fresh bruises. For a moment, a terrifying heartbeat of time, Methuselah did not recognize him. This was not the strong, familiar man who taught him to sow and harvest, who told him stories of the primordial days, who blessed him on his wedding day. This was a vessel, carved hollow and filled with something ancient and vast. Methuselah. His father's voice broke the name, and a single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. When I am gone, and I will be gone very soon, you will finally understand why your name means what it means. What are you talking about? Methuselah stepped closer, dropping to his knees beside the tablets. You are not going anywhere. You are merely exhausted, father. You require rest. You need... When he dies, it shall be sent. Enoch's voice was steady now, terrible in its complete certainty. That is the meaning of your name, my son. Your mother and I gave it to you under divine instruction. We did not understand the weight of it then. I do now. Your death will not be an ending. It will be a precise sign, a final signal before everything is remade. A warning of what? Father, you are not making sense. Enoch rose to his feet with unnerving, surprising speed, and Methuselah instinctively recoiled. His father crossed the intervening space and seized his wrist. The grip was iron, desperate and agonizing, like that of a drowning man grasping for a sliver of solid shore. The knuckles were bone-white, the tendons standing out like taut cords. You will not perish when others perish. You will not decay at the pace of normal men. You will outlive your children, your grandchildren, their grandchildren, and the generations after them. You will watch mighty cities materialize from dust and crumble back into it. You will witness wickedness proliferate across the earth like floodwaters. And you will bear sacred witness to every year of it. And on the exact day that your final breath is taken, judgment will descend upon this world like rain that will never, ever cease. Methuselah strained to pull away, but his father's grip only tightened, digging painfully into his flesh. Father, stop. You're hurting me. You're frightening me. I am telling you the unvarnished truth. Enoch's voice rose, cracking with devastating emotion. God is patient, infinitely more patient than any man deserves, more patient than this wretched world has the right to expect. And he is going to demonstrate the full measure of that patience through you. Every year you draw breath, every single year, will be a prolonged year of mercy for a world that neither desires mercy, nor seeks mercy, nor even believes mercy exists. Do you comprehend the gravity of what I am saying? No. Methuselah's voice was barely a strangled whisper. No, I don't understand any of this. I don't understand what is happening to you, what you are speaking of, why you say these impossible things. You will. Enoch released his wrist abruptly, causing Methuselah to nearly stumble backward. His father turned back to the scattered tablets, his shoulders sagging as if they bore an impossible, crushing weight. You will understand, my son. You must count every year. Mark them on wood, on stone, deep within your heart. Bear witness to the passing of each one. Do not allow them to blur into meaninglessness because they are not meaningless. Every single year is mercy. And when the count ends, his voice caught, shattering entirely. When the count ends, so does everything else. Methuselah's throat was dry, his heart accelerating wildly. How long? How many years are you speaking of? But Enoch offered no answer. He had picked up the stylus again, and his hand moved across the clay surface with renewed, desperate urgency, as if the remaining hours were insufficient to record something vital. The lamplight flickered violently, casting erratic, frantic shadows across the tent walls. Father, please, I must know how many years? The wind came then. It was not a natural wind. Not the kind that makes tent flaps billow gently and lamps flicker, carrying the scent of distant rain. This was something else entirely. A presence, a crushing force, a sound that synthesized rushing water, deep distant thunder, and the violent beating of 10,000 wings, all at once. A sound that Methuselah felt resonating in the marrow of his bones rather than heard strictly with his ears. The lamps flared to an impossible, blinding white intensity, and Methuselah instinctively threw his arm up to shield his vision. The clay tablets rattled and scraped across the dirt floor. The tent fabric snapped and billowed inward, though there was no opening for the force to enter. And beneath it all, he heard voices, or perhaps just one voice, speaking in 1,000 registers simultaneously, uttering words he could not quite catch. Words in a language he had never been taught, yet somehow he almost understood. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the wind evaporated. The terrifying sound faded to silence. The light returned to the normal, amber glow. Methuselah slowly lowered his arm, blinking away the lingering spots marring his vision. "Father?" The tent was utterly empty. The lamps still burned, their flames now steady and low. The tablets lay scattered on the ground, covered in those strange, hurtful symbols. His father's coarse robe lay crumpled exactly where he had been kneeling. But Enoch himself was gone. No body, no pool of blood, no sign of struggle, no indication of a struggle. Simply gone, as if the air itself had momentarily opened and swallowed him whole. Methuselah stood frozen, unable to draw breath, unable to construct a rational thought. His mind refused to process the image. People do not simply vanish. They die and are buried. They leave bodies behind. They leave something. Then he saw it. A single clay tablet, distinct from all the others. It lay half-buried in the packed dirt floor where his father's knees had pressed, as if driven there by immense force. He dropped to his knees and lifted it with shaking hands. One sentence was carved deeper than all the other inscriptions. The letters pressed so brutally hard the clay was cracked around the edges. Count every year. When the count ends, so does everything. The arrival of dawn found him still kneeling in the empty tent, the heavy tablet clutched to his chest, staring blankly at the space where his father had been a moment before. He did not remember the transition of the night. He did not recall taking a breath. He only remembered the impossible weight of the clay in his hands and the monumental, crushing absence before him. Footsteps approached the tent flap. The workers were arriving for the morning harvest. Someone called out, their voice muffled by the heavy fabric. "Methuselah? Are you inside?" He offered no reply. The tent flap opened. An elder peered inside, saw him kneeling there alone amidst the scattered clay, and his face furrowed with a deep frown. "Where is Enoch?" He was supposed to meet with the council at first light. Methuselah looked up slowly. His voice came from somewhere far away, outside himself, hollowed by the night's trauma. "Gone. Gone where?" the elder demanded. He stared down at the tablet in his hands, at the terrible promise carved into the clay, at the words that would come to define the rest of his impossibly long existence. "Somewhere I cannot follow." He paused, gathering strength. And when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible, thick with destiny. "Not yet." 30 years passed like water pouring through cupped hands. Inevitable, unstoppable, leaving behind only the fleeting memory of wetness. Methuselah was now 70 years old. His thick beard had begun to silver subtly at the temples. His hands bore the permanent stains and deep calluses of decades of relentless labor. His son, Lamech, now had sons of his own. The world continued its predictable, relentless turning. Seasons rotated. Crops were sown and harvested. People were born, grew visibly old, and died. Everything proceeded as it always had, as it always should, save for one terrifying exception. Methuselah himself felt no physical difference than he had at 40, at 50, or even 60. His back did not protest when he rose in the morning. His eyes did not dim with age. His formidable strength showed no hint of fading, and the people had begun, inevitably, to notice. The village elders had summoned him. He stood now in the council tent, facing a severe semicircle of 12 old men seated on woven mats. Clay lamps cast flickering, accusing shadows across their weathered faces. Faces he had known his entire life. His own uncle sat among them. So did his wife's father. Men who had blessed his marriage, held his children as infants, and who once treated him as one of their own kin. Now, They looked at him with an unbearable mixture of suspicion and deep-seated fear. The eldest among them, a man named Jotham, 90 years old and bent like a tree twisted by ceaseless winds, spoke first. His voice rattled like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Methuselah, son of Enoch, you stand before this council tonight to answer certain questions concerning your father. My father has been gone for precisely 30 years. Jotham leaned forward, his eyes sharp and unforgiving despite his age. Gone, not dead, not buried with proper rites, simply erased like charcoal from a slate. And this tale you spin, you told us he was taken by God. That is precisely what I witnessed." A younger elder, though still 20 years Methuselah's senior, laughed sharply, a brittle, cynical sound. "Taken by God? Do you hear the sound of your own words? Do you understand how that sounds to sensible men?" Another elder, a priest named Zakur, spoke with barely contained contempt. "Your father was mad, Methuselah. Everyone was aware of it. 3 days he stood in that field, raving about angels and impossible visions, writing in languages that have never existed. We all witnessed it. We all pitied you. He was not mad. Then where is he?" Zakur's voice rose, edged with hostility. "Where is his body? Where is his grave site? Your father abandoned you. He fled into the desolate wilderness like a madman and died alone in shame. And you, out of pride and shame, have invented this fairy tale about him being transported to heaven." Methuselah felt a scorching heat rise in his chest, but he kept his voice rigorously level. "I was there. I witnessed what occurred. The wind, the light, the wind." Another elder scoffed dismissively. "It was a passing storm. Nothing more." And now Jotham continued, his tone heavy with an official accusation. "You spread this profound heresy throughout the village. You tell our people that your father walks with God, that he was too righteous for the common fate of death. And you openly claim—" He paused, allowing the words to hang in the smoky air like a drawn sword. "You claim that you will live longer than any man born, and that your eventual death will be the herald of coming judgment." Silence descended upon the tent. The accusation sat heavy and suffocating in the stagnant air. Methuselah's jaw tightened. A single bead of sweat tracked a slow path down his temple, despite the cool evening. "My father told me I would inevitably outlive my entire generation. That my name, asterisk when he dies it shall be sent asterisk, was given to me for an exact reason. Every year I live is a prolonged year of mercy, and when I finally pass, judgment will arrive." The silence stretched for a terrifying instant. Then muffled laughter started. Just one elder at first, then another, until half the council was chuckling, bitter, mocking, and dismissive sounds. "Listen to him," one of them exclaimed. "He actually believes he is chosen, blessed above all men, too holy to die like the rest of us humble folk." Jotham raised a gnarled hand, and the laughter immediately died. His expression was granite hard. "This is pride, Methuselah, the most corrosive kind, the kind that masquerades falsely as piety. You dishonor your father's memory with these delusions, and you dishonor this community with your boundless arrogance. I speak only the truth I was given. By a madman," Zakur slammed his palm on the mat, "by a father who cruelly abandoned his family and died in shame. And now you demand that we believe you are some manner of prophet, some chosen, flawless vessel." Methuselah absorbed the words like physical blows, but he refused to step back or lower his gaze. He met their eyes, one by one, with unwavering conviction. "Believe whatever serves you. I cannot govern that. But in 30 years, I have not aged a day. I have not weakened. And in 30 more years, when you are all resting in the grave and I am still standing here, perhaps then you will pause and wonder if my father was truly as mad as you think." The words came out harder, sharper than he had intended. The elders stiffened, galvanized by the challenge. Jotham's face darkened, instantly becoming the color of a thundercloud ready to break. "Get out," the old man said quietly, the command laced with deadly finality. "Get out of this tent, and be warned, Methuselah, son of Enoch. Pride always precedes destruction, And a man who believes himself unkillable may find himself tested in ways he could never anticipate. Methuselah held Jotham's unforgiving gaze for one last heartbeat, then turned and walked out into the cool, judging night. His hands were shaking, not entirely with fear, but with white-hot anger and something infinitely worse, a profound, crushing loneliness. The terrible isolation of bearing a truth so immense that no one, not even his family, could possibly believe it. He walked for hours through the suffocating darkness, moving away from the village, away from the cutting judgment in those old, tired eyes. His feet carried him automatically up the familiar, winding path to the hilltop where his father used to conduct his private prayers, where Enoch would stand for endless hours, his face turned toward the silent heavens, listening to profound things Methuselah could never hear. At the summit he stopped, completely winded. The valley spread out below him. Scattered, weak fires, the dark, ordinary shapes of the tents, the distant, muffled sound of sheep bleating. A normal, utterly oblivious world. He pulled the clay tablet from inside his robe, the one his father had left behind. He had carried it every single day for 30 years. The terrifying words etched into his memory as deeply as they were scored into the clay. Asterisk count every year. When the count ends, so does everything. He sank heavily to his knees, clutching the tablet in both hands. His voice emerged raw, desperate, and near breaking. God, if my father spoke any truth, show me, please. If these years are truly yours, if this crushing burden is real, let me see one sign, just one sign, because I am drowning here. They believe I am mad. They believe I am consumed by pride. And sometimes, his voice fractured into a sob. Sometimes I wonder if they are correct. Sometimes I question if I imagined it all. The wind, the light, everything. Silence answered him. Just the soft, steady whisper of the night breeze through the high grass. The distant, lonely hoot of an owl. Empty, ordinary sounds. He closed his eyes, and the tears finally came. Hot, bitter tears born of doubt, isolation, and the crushing, terrifying weight of a calling no one else could see. Please, he whispered into the dirt. Please, I need to know this is not merely madness. The wind came. It was a localized, surgical gale, not the sweep of a storm front. The tall grasses immediately around him twisted, defying physics, spiraling upward toward the non-existent canopy. It carried a strange, sterile scent, like rain that has yet to fall, like lightning about to strike. Methuselah's breath caught fast in his throat. He forced his eyes open. In the near distance, perhaps 100 paces down the slope, stood a lone tree. A twisted olive tree, ancient and gnarled, a sentinel that had marked the hillside for longer than any elder could recall. As he watched, a sudden, silent flash of cobalt light tore the black canvas of the sky. It struck the tree dead center. He braced himself for fire, for the deafening crack of splitting wood, for the smell of burning sap. But the tree did not burn. It glowed. A soft wave of steady, internal light emanated from the trunk, from the deep roots, and traveled along every branch, as if the lightning had been absorbed and instantly transformed into something gentle, impossibly magnetic, something that beckoned him forward. Methuselah ran. His feet flew wildly over the uneven ground, his robe tangling momentarily around his legs. He nearly fell twice, but recovered instantly, driven by a conviction stronger than fear, by something beyond thought. He had to run, to scramble over the uneven earth to reach the source of that impossible radiance. He had to arrive before it vanished, had to see what was being revealed. When he finally reached the tree, gasping for air that burned in his lungs, the fierce, blinding heart of the glow was already receding, pulling back like an ebbing tide. But it was still there, bathing the ancient trunk in a soft, internal luminescence. A warm light that pulsed faintly, resonating with a rhythm that felt disturbingly like the slow, steady beat of his own heart. And carved into the thick, gnarled bark, impossible fresh against the years of growth, the wood still weeping translucent drops of sticky sap, were 3 Hebrew letters. Hey Chet, Yud, Chai, life. Methuselah reached out with trembling, hesitant fingers and touched the rugged surface. It felt alive and warm beneath his skin. When he pulled his hand away, his fingertips were wet, not with the familiar resin of the tree, but with something else entirely. A clear, warm liquid that glistened on his skin, chillingly reminiscent of tears. As if the ancient cedar itself were weeping, he stared at the mysterious moisture sparkling on his skin, trying to reconcile the impossible sight with the logic of the physical world. And then he heard it. It was not a conventional voice. No sound waves hit his eardrums. No external vibration could be detected. It was a communication that bypassed the senses entirely, speaking directly into the core of his being, into the hollow, aching cavity of his chest, precisely where the acid of doubt and existential dread had been consuming him for decades. Every year you live, someone else receives mercy. Count them. Bear them. When the count is full, I will count no more. The words settled inside him with the solemn, irreversible weight of stones dropped into the bottom of a fathomless well, sending immediate, shattering ripples through the structure of everything he had believed about himself. This revelation wasn't about him at all. It never had been. His life, with its incomprehensible length and its strange isolation, was not a personal blessing, nor was it a divine curse directed at him. It was a function. It was a mechanism for a greater purpose. For every year he was granted breath, somewhere in this unaware, self-consumed world, a single soul received an extension. Someone was granted one more precious day, or perhaps a year, to turn away from darkness, to seek understanding, and potentially, to find redemption. He hadn't been chosen because he was inherently more righteous than his peers. He had been chosen because God was patient, and he was the necessary anchor for that patience. The glow faded completely, sinking back into the wood until the night returned to its normal, velvety darkness. But Methuselah remained kneeling at the base of the tree, his wet fingers still pressed against the fresh, impossible letters, silent, heavy tears streaming down his face as he finally understood the crushing scale of his assignment. How many years, Lord? His voice was thin, a raw whisper against the vast silence of the hills. How long must I carry this silence? It was a silence that was not empty. It was saturated, oppressively full. Full of presence, full of relentless watching, full of a divine patience so immense that it rendered the entire scope of human history into little more than a frantic series of heartbeats. He waited there, shivering, until the first hint of gray light touched the horizon, hoping for a clarifying answer, a date, a signpost. None came, but when the sun finally broke over the eastern hills, flooding the valley with golden rose light that painted the scene with a heartbreaking, deceptive beauty, he finally rose to his feet. The brittle clay tablet, his father Enoch's final, cryptic message, was still clutched in his left hand. He looked at that fragile testament and then back at the carved promise on the tree. Life, not the sudden finality of death, but life, given year after year to heedless people who didn't even realize they were receiving it, to a world that had no awareness that it was continually being granted a reprieve. He began the long, heavy walk back to the village. The elders would dismiss his account as fevered madness. His wife would worry, seeing the depth of sorrow etched on his face. His son Lamech would ask questions that he could only answer in frustrating fragments. But none of that doubt held the central importance it once had. He knew the foundational truth now. Not every detail, not the final number, not the ultimate timing, but enough. Enough to take the next agonizing step. Enough to endure the next year. Enough to establish the beginning of the count. When he reached the relative sanctuary of his home, he immediately searched for a suitable piece of wood. Smooth, resilient cedar, strong enough to last centuries. He borrowed a sharp chisel from his neighbor, ignoring the man's questioning look. That evening, under the faint, smoky light of an oil lamp, with the rhythmic breathing of his family sleeping nearby, he began his task. Into the strong cedar plank, he meticulously carved 30 small vertical lines, one for each year that had passed since his father Enoch's vanishing. 30 years of unaccounted mercy. 30 years of invisible patience. 30 years of a countdown he was only now beginning to grasp. He ran his callous thumb over the clean, sharp grooves, then looked at the vast, unsettling emptiness of the remaining wood. Hundreds, thousands. His hand trembled from the sheer scope of the required endurance, but he set the ledger aside carefully, wrapping it in linen cloth, placing it in a deep corner of his tent where it would serve as his first and last sight of every day. Tomorrow he would face the village again. Tomorrow he would endure their creeping doubts, their outright mockery, and the coldness of their fear. Tomorrow he would continue being the strange, enduring man who seemed to claim far too much while proving almost nothing. But tonight, beneath the cold, watchful stars, he knew he was not mad. He knew his father had not been mad. And he knew that somewhere in this dark and rapidly collapsing world, a single human soul had just been granted another year of grace, and it had cost him, Methuselah, everything he possessed to give it to them. 50 years passed, not quickly, never quickly, but with the relentless, grinding steadiness of flowing water wearing away granite. Methuselah was now 120 years old, and the profound, agonizing strangeness of his existence had solidified into an undeniable, visible reality. His wife, Edna, had aged precisely as women age in a hard, demanding world. Her hair was now the white color of winter frost. Her hands were spotted and painfully twisted by the deep, persistent ache that claims fingers that have worked soil and prepared food for 7 decades. She moved slowly, breathing heavily after even small exertions, often relying on the support of their son, Lamech, when walking the short distance to the well. At 75, she was old by any measure, though still fiercely vital in spirit. But standing next to Methuselah, she seemed to belong to an entirely different epoch. Methuselah himself still looked like a man in his prime, perhaps 40 or 45 on a day when the exhaustion of the fields finally caught up to him. His thick beard was streaked with gray, yes, but no more so than it had been 20 years earlier. His back remained straight, rigid. His eyes remained clear and sharp. His hands, those impossibly smooth, strong hands, could still grip a plow, still lift a heavy stone, still work tirelessly from sunrise to sunset without the crippling exhaustion that claimed other men half his age. Their grandchildren were grown now. Lamech's sons had sons of their own. Methuselah had quietly watched 3 generations spring up and mature around him, while he himself remained unnaturally frozen, like a tree that brutally refused to acknowledge the passing of seasons. And the whispers in the village had turned colder, darker. Fear, having been allowed to fester, had curdled first into suspicion, and now into outright hostility. The merchant caravan arrived on a blustery spring afternoon, when the air carried the heavy, thick scent of rain that had yet to fall. Methuselah was outside his home, painstakingly repairing a section of the rough stone wall that had begun to crumble near the tent. His young great-grandsons played in the dust nearby, building miniature, detailed villages out of mud and pebbles, their high, bright voices full of innocent imagination. The lead trader dismounted from his donkey, a grizzled, massive man with a face like deeply weathered leather, and eyes that looked like they had witnessed too much of the world's burgeoning darkness. He was perhaps 60, visibly bent and scarred from years of travel and rough dealing, but his gaze was fiercely sharp as he approached. Behind him, 3 younger men began tending to the pack animals, but they kept casting uneasy, quick glances toward Methuselah, their expressions mixing intense curiosity with palpable unease. "You're the one they call the Undying, aren't you?" The trader's voice was rough, skeptical, and deliberately challenging. Yet, underneath the skepticism, there was a faint, unsettling tremor of something else. Hunger, perhaps, or a naked desperation. Methuselah set down the heavy stone he had been fitting into place. He didn't rise yet. "I am just a man with a name. Methuselah, son of Enoch, son of the one who vanished. They say the one who was taken by God." The trader spat a stream of dark juice into the dirt, narrowly missing Methuselah's sandals. "I've heard the stories. I've traveled 3 territories in the past year, and in every single village someone mentions you. The man who doesn't age. The cursed one. The one with demon blood." He stepped closer, his imposing shadow falling across Methuselah's bent back. Some say you made a pact with dark powers. Others say you discovered some secret, some rare herb or a forgotten ritual that stops time itself. Just tell me which. Methuselah finally rose to his feet slowly, deliberately drawing himself up to his full height. He was substantially taller than the trader, and the physical difference between them was shocking. One bent, haggard, and visibly collapsing under the tyranny of time, the other standing straight and vibrant, despite having walked the earth for twice the length of the merchant's life. I've made no pact. I know no secret. I simply continue. That's not natural, the trader insisted, his eyes narrowing to slits. Nothing lives like you live. Nothing human, anyway. Before Methuselah could formulate a response, Edna appeared in the doorway of their home. She had been inside grinding grain, and her frail arms were lightly dusted with white flour. She saw the trader, noted the sudden tension in her husband's shoulders, and moved immediately to stand between them with the fierce, instinctive protectiveness of a woman who had spent 50 years defending the man everyone else feared or mocked. "Leave us," she demanded. Her voice was thin now, brittle with age, but it carried an unexpected authority forged in enduring hardship. "We have nothing for you, nothing to sell, nothing to trade. Leave us in peace." But the trader held his ground. Instead, he reached into the deep folds of his robe and pulled out a heavy leather purse. It clinked loudly, the unmistakable, enticing sound of metal, probably gold or electrum. "I'll pay you," he stated, looking past Edna's aging face directly to Methuselah. "Good money. More than you've probably seen in your entire life. Just tell me your secret. How do you cheat death? What keeps you young while the rest of us rot?" The word hung in the dusty air between them like a noxious cloud. Cheat. Methuselah's jaw tightened visibly. Something hot and hard rose swiftly in his chest. A sudden flare of defensive righteous anger. "I don't cheat anything," he stated, his voice resonating low and firm. "I don't cheat death. I don't cheat time. I certainly don't cheat God. I carry something. That's all." "Carry what? A talisman? A curse? A mercy?" The word came out harder and sharper than Methuselah intended. A statement of undeniable fact. "I carry mercy. Every year I breathe, someone else receives another chance. That is the burden. That is the function. And it costs me everything. My reputation, my peace, my rightful place in this community. The sorrow of watching those I love pass while I remain. So take your gold and your questions and your accusations, and leave my family alone." The trader stared at him for a long, calculating moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed. A bitter, hollow, completely disbelieving sound. "Mercy, right? You're as mad as they say." He spat again, the moisture landing closer to Methuselah's feet this time. "Mad or lying. Either way, you're not worth the journey." He turned abruptly, striding back toward his caravan, shouting rough orders to his men. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving only swirling dust and the fading sound of donkey hooves echoing faintly on the hard-packed road. Edna gently touched Methuselah's arm. Her grip was weak now, his flesh barely registering the pressure. Yet the gesture itself spoke volumes of shared endurance. "Are you all right?" He didn't answer immediately. He was staring down at the space where the trader had stood, at the dark, wet spot in the dirt where the man's contemptuous spit had landed. "They'll never understand," he said quietly, a profound weariness settling over him. "No matter how many years I live, no matter how many times I try to explain it truthfully, they will never see this as anything but madness or a demonic power." "Then let them think what they think," Edna replied, her hand tightening marginally on his arm. "You know the truth. I know the truth. That is enough." But was it? Was belief from one aging wife and a son who desperately tried to maintain faith, but sometimes looked at his father with faint, unsettling questions in his eyes, truly enough? Was it enough when the judgment of the entire known world called him cursed? That night, after Edna had gone to bed and the grandchildren had been taken home by their parents, Methuselah sat alone beside the small, flickering fire outside his home. The wooden tablet rested across his knees, a crushing weight now, not in physical mass, but in the sheer scale of what it represented. 120 marks. 120 years. 120 years of divine mercy granted to a world that actively rejected it, failed to recognize it, and certainly offered no thanks to the single, flawed vessel who bore the agonizing responsibility. He pulled out his sharp chisel and, with the solemnity of a high priest performing a sacred rite, added the 120th mark. The sound of metal biting into the old cedar echoed unervingly in the quiet darkness. Sharp, final, irreversible. One more year bought for humanity. One more act of unfathomable divine patience. One more day of undeserved grace for someone who would never know they had received it at Methuselah's expense. He ran his thumb over the fresh groove, then looked at the terrifying amount of empty space remaining on the cedar plank. Still so much unblemished wood. Still so many years stretching ahead. An incomprehensible future of endless, solitary duration. How many more? He whispered to the darkness, to God, to the void, to himself. How many more before it ends? No answer came. It never did. Just the low, comforting crackling of the fire, the distant, mournful howl of a jackal hunting in the hills, and the sound of his own breathing. Steady, unwavering, immortal. 10 years later, everything changed in the devastating way that changes always arrive. Suddenly, crushingly, and without mercy. Methuselah was 130. Edna was 85. She had been declining for months, moving less, eating less, sleeping more and more throughout the day. The village healer had visited and departed, shaking his head, offering useless herbs. There was no specific disease, no injury, just time, finally catching up with her in the way it catches up with every mortal soul. Every soul, that is, except her husband. It was early morning when Lamech came running to Methuselah in the far field. His son was 60 now, gray-bearded, weathered by decades of brutal labor, bent slightly forward by the sheer weight of his mortal life. He was gasping, painfully out of breath, and deep, silent tears were streaming down his face. "Father, come quickly. Mother she's asking for you." Methuselah dropped the heavy hoe he had been using and ran. His preserved legs ate up the distance with horrifying ease. Too easily. He reached their home in minutes while Lamech struggled desperately to keep pace behind him, wheezing and stumbling. It was yet another cruel, undeniable proof of the stark difference between them. Inside, Edna lay on their sleeping mat, propped up with cushions Lamech's wife had painstakingly arranged. Her breathing was shallow, agonizingly labored. Her skin had acquired the fragile, translucent quality of old paper held up to the light. But her eyes, those remarkable eyes that had watched him for 50 years, that had witnessed him remain utterly unchanged while she withered and aged, were still lucid and clear. Methuselah. His name came out as barely a whisper, a mere puff of air. He dropped immediately to his knees beside her, gathering her hand into both of his own. Her fingers were terribly thin now, the fragile bones beneath the papery skin feeling like the wings of a small, fallen bird. I'm here, my love." She managed a slight, ghostly smile. "You're always here. That's the central problem, isn't it? You're always here, and I'm leaving. Don't say that. Don't. Hush." She squeezed his hand with the last vestiges of her strength. "We both know, husband. I'm 85 years old. I've lived a full life, a good life, and now it's time." The tears came before he could halt them, hot, bitter, blurring his vision of her beloved face. "I'm not ready. I'll never be ready for this. You'll have to be." She reached up with her other hand. The movement cost her a visible, shuddering effort and touched his face. Her fingers traced the lines around his eyes that hadn't deepened in 5 decades, the jawline that was still powerfully strong, the eyes that still saw with perfect clarity. "Look at you. Still so young. Still so strong." "I'm not young. I'm 130 years old. But you look 40. A single, slow tear slid down her weathered cheek. "And I look like your great-grandmother." The village children asked Lamech why his mother married a young man. "Did you know that? They don't understand." "How could they?" "Edna, promise me something." Her voice was fading rapidly, each word now an immense effort. "Promise me you'll find meaning in this. In all the years ahead, don't let them become empty. Don't let bitterness eat you alive. Every year you live, remember what you told me about the tree, about the voice you heard. Every year is mercy for someone. Make it count. He could barely speak past the agonizing tightness in his throat. I promise. And when I'm gone, she paused, struggling desperately for a deep breath. When I'm gone, remember that I believed you. I never thought you were mad. I never thought you were cursed. I always believed that God chose you for this heavy burden because he knew you were strong enough to bear it. I'm not strong enough. Not without you. She smiled again, a radiant, fleeting expression that was the exact smile he remembered from their wedding day, from the births of their children, from 1,000 quiet, shared moments of ordinary life. Yes, you are. You just don't know it yet. Her breathing became increasingly labored. Lamech and his wife stood grieving quietly in the doorway. The grandchildren had been kept outside, but Methuselah could hear their confused, frightened voices asking, "What is happening?" "I love you," Edna whispered. "I always loved you. From the first day to this last day, that never changed even when everything else did. I love you too, always, forever." Not forever. Her eyes were finally closing, the effort of keeping them open too great. "Just until we meet again. And for you, my strange, timeless husband, that might be a very long time." A pause. A shuddering, rattling breath. "Be patient. Like the God you serve." He held her hand tightly as her breathing slowed, as the agonizing space between each breath grew longer, as the warm, vital light behind her eyes, that unique spark that made her her, began the final, inevitable fade. When she finally went still, when that final, last breath left her and failed to return, Methuselah didn't move. He stayed there, kneeling, holding her cooling hand, staring at the peaceful, aged face he had loved for 50 years. The face that had grown old while his remained perpetually young. The face he would never see again. Until when? 100 years from now? 500? Lamech, his own face contorted with grief and years, placed a hand heavily on his father's shoulder. "Father, she's gone." "I know." His own voice sounded terrifyingly strange to his ears. Hollow. Empty. "I know she's gone." The funeral was held 3 days later. The entire village attended, not out of love or respect for Methuselah, but out of genuine, deep respect for Edna, who had been kind, generous, and had never claimed to be anything more than she was. They dug the grave high on a hillside overlooking the fertile valley. They wrapped her body in clean linen. They spoke the proper prayers and poured the proper offerings. And Methuselah stood there, rigid and dry-eyed, watching them slowly lower his wife into the waiting earth. In that moment, an understanding of terrible clarity washed over him. He would do this again, and again, and again. He would bury Lamech. He would bury Lamech's children. He would bury their children and their children's children. He would stand at graveside after graveside, watching every single person he had ever loved return to dust, while he remained unchanging, a solitary, immortal witness to their collective mortality. This was the true cost. This was what carrying mercy meant. Not simply living longer, but living beyond. Beyond the natural, comforting span of life. Beyond the deaths of all his loved ones. Beyond the simple comfort of knowing his own end was near. After the mourners had slowly dispersed, after Lamech and his family had returned home to begin the period of formal grief, Methuselah stayed. He stood alone at the raw edge of the grave as the sun began to set, painting the sky in deep shades of red and gold that Edna would have adored. He pulled out the wooden tablet. 130 marks now. He stared at them. Each mark represented a year. Each year a piece of his life spent. A piece of mercy granted. But the marks stretching into the future would all be years without Edna. They would be carved in her permanent absence. 130 years, he said to the fresh-turned earth. And I'm still here. The words felt less like a statement of fact and more like an accusation, like a curse he leveled at the earth, a truth too overwhelmingly heavy to bear. But he would bear it because what real choice did he have? The count wasn't finished. The tablet wasn't full. The time for mercy had not yet run out. He gently touched the earth above where Edna lay. "I'll make them count," he whispered, fulfilling her final request. "Like you asked. I'll make every year count for something. I promise you." A gentle wind rose. Not supernatural, just the normal evening breeze that swept up from the valley floor. But it carried the faint, sweet scent of wild mountain flowers. And for just a moment, Methuselah allowed himself the fragile delusion that it was Edna's way of saying she had heard his vow. In the far distance, storm clouds were gathering. They were unnatural clouds, too dark for the season, too low to the ground, moving slowly but deliberately against the prevailing wind. He watched them for a long moment, a cold dread settling deep in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something was shifting in the very fabric of existence. He could feel it in his bones, taste it in the air itself. The world was getting darker. Wickedness was spreading like an aggressive disease. Violence had become commonplace, the default language of men. The Nephilim, the monstrous giant offspring of the sons of God and human women, walked the earth now, and wherever they trod, corruption followed swiftly behind. And he would witness all of it, every terrible year of it, every sickening descent into moral darkness. Because that was the essence of the burden. That was the singular calling. Count them, bear them, remember them. Until the count finally ended, until everything ended. He turned and began the long, solitary walk back to a home that would feel profoundly empty now. Behind him, the unnatural storm clouds continued to gather, and somewhere in their dark, churning heart, thunder began to rumble. Low, distant, inevitable. 100 years passed. Not quickly, never quickly, but with the grinding, merciless inevitability of a massive millstone turning, crushing everything soft and temporary into powder. Methuselah was 230 years old. The gentle, familiar world he had been born into was utterly gone. Not destroyed by catastrophe, but transformed beyond any recognition. Villages had swollen into dense towns. Towns had exploded into small, chaotic cities. The human population had spiraled out of control, spreading across the fertile valleys like a thick, living, suffocating carpet. And with the people came things Methuselah never could have imagined in the quiet days of his youth. Markets that spanned entire hillsides. Immense, crude temples dedicated to grotesque new gods whose very names made his skin crawl. Breweries producing potent intoxicants that turned men into shrieking beasts overnight. And everywhere, pervasive, casual violence. But what chilled him most deeply were the Nephilim. They towered over ordinary men, some reaching 9 feet in height, others even larger. Their eyes were wrong, too big, reflecting light like the predatory gaze of an animal in the deep dark. Their physical strength was inhuman. Methuselah had seen one lift a fully grown ox over his head as easily as a man lifts a child. They ruled through naked fear and brutal force, claiming divine right due to their impossible parentage. The offspring of the angelic sons of God, who had defied the Creator, came down, and forcibly took human women for wives. Where they walked, corruption followed. The burden of his existence clung to him like a shroud. Methuselah passed into the sprawling, corrupt heart of the city of Enoch, a place named with cruel irony after his grandfather, the righteous man who had walked with God and vanished. Enoch, the city, bore no resemblance to anything the ancestor would have blessed. It was a testament to the world's rapid decline. The market stalls were crammed with the illicit spoils of a lawless age. Silks from imagined eastern valleys, exotic spices, brutal iron weapons, potent wines that guaranteed oblivion, and the worst commodity. Human beings, marked for slavery, alongside mysterious substances promising an escape from the harsh reality of their lives. The air itself was a palpable weight, heavy with the stench of cooking meat, unwashed bodies, smoke, and an underlying spiritual rot, a decay so profound it hadn't yet fully manifested in the physical structure of the buildings, but tainted every breath. As always, every head turned. They stared. His notoriety preceded him now, a dark aura extending far beyond the confines of his secluded cave and former village. He was known everywhere. The undying, the cursed one, the demon-touched. Some of the fearful quickly executed ancient signs against ill fortune as he moved past, while others simply stepped aside, giving him a wide berth, as if his abnormal age were a virulent disease, or as if the strange force preserving his youth might lash out at those who dared approach. He kept his gaze fixed on the dusty earth, attempting the impossible task of invisibility despite his utter conspicuousness. He was here for the most mundane of errands, to exchange stored grain for necessary iron tools, nothing more. He craved swift completion and escape before the inevitable trouble found him. But trouble, it seemed, was an inevitable consequence of his breathing now. A sharp sting on his shoulder broke his concentration. A small but deliberately thrown stone. It wouldn't injure him, not seriously, but it conveyed its message perfectly. He stopped, turning with deliberate, weary slowness. A small cluster of children stood huddled near a fruit stall. They were perhaps 8 or 9 years old, yet their faces were etched with a practiced, casual cruelty that was terrifying to witness in the young. The perpetrator, a scarred boy with eyes too old for his face, flashed a vicious, triumphant grin. "Cursed one!" the boy shrieked, his voice thin but potent. "Demon-born!" The surrounding adults offered no help. Some smirked in silent agreement. Others pointedly looked away. Violence directed at Methuselah was not only tolerated but tacitly encouraged. He was the living, breathing representation of what they could not understand, and what humanity cannot comprehend, it strives to annihilate. Before Methuselah could even process a response, a woman, likely the children's mother, stepped forward and spat. The thick glob of saliva landed squarely in the dust between them. She regarded him with an expression of pure, unadulterated loathing. "You're an abomination. You should have been dust 3 centuries ago. The fact that you're still here, still drawing breath, proves beyond doubt that you've struck an unholy pact with the deep darkness." Methuselah's throat tightened, constricting the breath that everyone wished would stop. He could have tried to answer, could have attempted the 1000th explanation of his innocence, that he was neither cursed nor possessed nor evil. But why? They never listened. They never heard. He simply turned and resumed his slow, conspicuous walk, ignoring the renewed swell of laughter and jeers that followed him like buzzards. His hands trembled violently, not from the weakness of age, never from age, but from the violent convergence of suppressed rage, profound grief, and the crushing, unbearable loneliness of being utterly, completely singular in a suffocating sea of humanity. Then, abruptly he felt it, a seismic shift in the market's atmosphere. A profound, instantaneous silence spread outward like a shockwave. The jeering died instantly. Even the relentless din of commerce, the haggling, the clatter of goods, the restless bleating of penned animals, faded into a chilling vacuum. Methuselah looked up, understanding instantly the source of this sudden hush. A Nephilim had entered the market square. This particular giant was colossal, easily 9.5 feet tall. His shoulders so immense they spanned the width of 2 normal men standing side by side. His hair, black and coarse, fell in thick ropes past his waist. His beard was intricately braided with gruesome trophies, small, polished cylinders that Methuselah recognized with a lurch of horror as human finger bones. His eyes were the most disturbing feature. Twin pools of molten gold, burning with an intelligence that was simultaneously hyperhuman and deeply, fundamentally less than human. The crowd instantly cleaved before him. No one dared speak. No one even risked a loud inhale. Fear was now a tangible, physical presence in the square, thick enough to be tasted on the tongue. The Nephilim's terrible gaze swept deliberately across the petrified faces, and then, with terrifying finality, it settled upon Methuselah. For a suspended moment, neither moved. They merely stared across the dusty chaos of the market, the giant and the man who would not die. 2 profound anomalies recognizing each other across the divide of creation. Then the Nephilim began to advance. Each footfall was heavy enough to cause the ground to tremble subtly. The remaining crowd scattered violently, flattening themselves against the vendor stalls and stone walls to grant the monster passage. Methuselah's heart pounded a brutal rhythm against his ribs. Yet he did not flee. Running was pointless. The creature could cover the distance in 3 easy strides. The Nephilim halted directly in front of him. He was so close that Methuselah had to painfully crane his neck back just to meet those terrifying golden eyes. The creature then slowly lowered his massive head, his face descending until it hovered mere inches from Methuselah's own. His breath was hot and carried the metallic stench of copper and ash. "You." The voice was a shocking anomaly. Deep, profoundly resonant, yet twisted, sounding like a chorus of deep voices speaking in flawless, unsettling unison. "You smell like time. Old time. Heavenly time." Methuselah's mouth was bone dry, but he forced the simple words past his lips. "I'm just a man." "No." The Nephilim's lips drew back in a terrible parody of a smile, exposing teeth that were far too sharp, far too numerous for a mortal mouth. "You're not. A man lives 70 years, maybe 80, if the spirit of strength is upon him. But you." He leaned in even closer, and Methuselah saw his own minuscule reflection swimming in those metallic eyes. "You have walked this earth for centuries. I can scent it on you. The dust of countless ages, the crushing weight of years that should have pulverized you into nothing long ago. What do you want?" The Nephilim straightened, rising to his full, terrifying height once more. "I want to know what you are. My father." He paused, and for the briefest flicker, there was something almost mournful in his massive face. "My father descended from the heavens. He told my mother that he was one of the Watchers, one of the holy ones who were given the charge over mankind. But he saw her, desired her beauty, took her, and I was born. Something new, something powerfully disruptive, something that should never have existed. I know what you are," Methuselah stated quietly, his voice unervingly steady. "You are the product of rebellion. Angels who abandoned their heavenly station, who violated the essential order of creation itself." The Nephilim released a burst of laughter, a horrifying noise, like massive stones being ground together, like the planet itself splitting open under unimaginable strain. "Rebellion. Yes, we are children of rebellion, and we are glorious in our power. We do not perish meaninglessly like cattle. We do not bow to invisible, silent gods. We do not spend our brief, pathetic lives scratching in the dirt and offering futile prayers for mercy." His golden gaze locked onto Methuselah again. "But you are utterly different. Something that smells like their world but insists on living in ours." "How?" "I don't know. Liar." The Nephilim's gigantic hand shot out with impossible speed and clamped around Methuselah's wrist. The grip was instantaneous and crushing. Methuselah felt his bones grating together beneath the pressure, felt his flesh bruising and tearing beneath the iron vice of the creature's fingers. But he did not cry out. He would not grant this monstrous being the satisfaction of hearing his pain. "Tell me your secret," the Nephilim hissed, his copper-ash breath hot on Methuselah's face. "Tell me how you cheat the consequence of death, and perhaps I will allow you to keep your pathetic life for a few more of your precious centuries." Methuselah met those terrible, burning eyes and spoke with a terrifying steadiness he did not possess. "I do not cheat death. Death will come for me precisely when God decides to send it. And when it does, when my final breath leaves me, you and everything you represent will be judged and swept away." For a prolonged moment, the Nephilim simply stared, his crushing grip unwavering. Then he abruptly released Methuselah's wrist and stepped back. His expression had shifted. The amused contempt was replaced by something darker, perhaps profound weariness, or an ancient, simmering anger. "Your God is silent," he said slowly, his voice losing its choral resonance. "He was silent when my father abandoned his post. Silent when we were born, and silent as we spread across this earth and seized everything we desired. We are loud, old man. We are powerful. We are here. Who do you imagine wins? The silent God or the loud ones?" "The one who is silent now," Methuselah retorted, rubbing his instantly darkening, throbbing wrist, "is the one who will speak last. And when he speaks, the mountains themselves will melt like wax under his gaze." The Nephilim held his gaze for another impossibly long silence. Then he threw back his gigantic head and laughed. That horrifying, grinding sound that caused the market-goers to instinctively cover their ears and shrink further. I hope you live long enough to witness just how wrong you are, old man. I hope you live to see my children's children rule every corner of this polluted world. I hope your God's silence becomes so deep, so complete, that even you finally cease to believe he will ever speak again. He turned and stalked away, the crowd parting before him like water before the prow of a massive warship. Within moments he was gone, and the market slowly, tentatively, began to breathe again. But now no one dared approach Methuselah. No one met his eyes. He had been physically touched by one of them, and that contamination made him even more untouchable than he had been before. Methuselah abandoned his trading entirely. He couldn't trust himself to handle the grain. His hands were shaking too badly, his heart still hammering the frantic rhythm of near death. He turned and fled the city, heading back toward the wilderness, back toward the necessary isolation that had become his only sanctuary. Night had fallen fully by the time he reached his dwelling. It was no longer the small house in his home village, but a complex, dry cave system high in the secluded hills, a deliberate fortress against people, their volatile fear, and their corrosive hatred. Lamech, his beloved son, was long dead, buried 2 decades prior. Another grave, another agonizing farewell witnessed by the man who remained. Lamech's sons, Methuselah's grandsons, were themselves old men now, scattered across various distant settlements. They visited occasionally, but the visits were rare. The strangeness of having a grandfather who appeared decades younger than they did was simply too much for most of them to reconcile. Inside the cool, silent cave, Methuselah lit a small oil lamp. The meager flame cast frantic, dancing shadows on the rough, uneven stone walls. He settled cross-legged on a woven mat, one of the few simple comforts he permitted himself, and gently pulled out the wooden tablet. 230 marks. 230 years. 230 years of profound, unwarranted mercy granted to a world that seemed determined to grow exponentially darker with every passing day. He ran his impossibly young fingers over the marks, feeling each minute groove of the cedar plank. Then he looked at the remaining blank space. So much wood was left. So many untold years stretched ahead. The realization made him want to collapse and weep. "I'm so tired, God," he whispered into the absolute silence. The words resonated weakly off the cave walls, dying quickly in the indifferent darkness. 230 years. I've buried my wife. I've buried my son. I have watched wickedness spread like a devastating flood. The Nephilim rule through fear. Violence is everywhere. Corruption stains every corner. And yet I just keep breathing. His voice finally broke. He set the tablet down and pressed his palms hard against his eyes, desperately attempting to suppress the torrent of tears threatening to overwhelm him. But they came anyway. Hot, bitter tears that had been held back for decades, perhaps centuries. How much longer must I carry this burden? How many more years? How many more funerals? How many more markets where vicious children throw stones and adults spit? How many more hateful encounters with creatures who openly mock your existence while you remain absolutely silent? The answering silence was absolute, a crushing void. No whisper of wind, no divine voice, no illuminating sign. Just the small, uncertain flickering of the lamp and the ragged sound of his own breathing. He opened his eyes and gazed at the tablet once more. Then, slowly, purposefully, he picked up his chisel. The metal felt heavy in his hand, heavier than its weight, as if it accumulated existential mass with each passing year. But he positioned it carefully against the wood and struck. The sound echoed in the cave system, sharp, final, the confirmation of a completed cycle. Mark number 230 was carved. Another year purchased. Another measure of grace dispensed. Another day that someone, somewhere, had received mercy they did not deserve simply because he continued to draw breath. As he set the chisel down, he noticed the fresh, undeniable evidence on his hands. His strong, impossibly youthful hands were already covered in vivid bruises from the Nephilim's terrible grip. 5 perfect finger marks were already turning a sickly purple-black against his pale skin. They would heal, of course. They always did. Within a week, there would be no visible trace. But right now they were proof. Proof that he could still be hurt. Proof that he was not truly invincible, not immortal, but merely suspended in time for a purpose he barely understood. He lay back on the woven mat, staring up at the cave ceiling where the lamplight projected phantom shapes. Sleep arrived slowly, reluctantly, and with it came something he had not experienced in years. A vision. It lacked the searing vividness of the glowing tree, unaccompanied by supernatural light or booming voices, yet it was undeniably clear. He saw water rising dark, relentless, consuming everything in its path, and floating upon that deadly surface impossibly, miraculously. He saw a colossal wooden structure, massive beyond anything he had ever seen built, a vessel of some kind with 3 distinct levels visible, sealed tightly against the deluge. Inside, perceived through strange, distant openings, he somehow discerned the cargo. Animals 2 by 2 of every variety. Creatures great and small, predator and prey, all coexisting in an unnatural, serene harmony. And he saw people, a mere handful of souls, 8 individuals, a family, safe within, while the entire world outside drowned in righteous judgment. Standing at an opening in the vessel's massive side, looking out over the churning water with a face simultaneously peaceful and deeply sorrowful, he saw a boy. Just a boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with dark, tightly curled hair and eyes that held a depth of wisdom no child should possess. The boy turned slowly, as if sensing Methuselah's gaze across the barrier of time and dream, and looked directly at him. Those eyes. Methuselah recognized something undeniable in them. The specific shape, the profound depth, the particular shade of brown. They were his eyes, his family's eyes. This boy carried his blood, his direct line, his legacy. The boy's lips moved, forming a single word that Methuselah heard not with his ears, but with something far deeper in his soul. Wait. Then the vision dissolved, fading rapidly like morning mist burned away by the unseen sun, leaving only the cave's darkness, the steady flame of the oil lamp, and the sharp, indelible impression of that face, those eyes, and that impossible vessel riding out the final judgment. Methuselah gasped himself awake, realizing he hadn't known he'd even been asleep. His heart hammered wildly. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the cool cave air. The vision clung tenaciously to his consciousness, refusing to be reasoned away or forgotten. And with it came a deep certainty he hadn't felt in decades. A knowing that settled into his very bones like restorative warmth after bitter cold. There is a boy coming. Not soon. The vision felt impossibly distant, separated from the present by a gulf of untold years, but coming nonetheless. A boy who would matter more than anyone. A boy who would build something unimaginable in the face of the world's mockery and disbelief. A boy destined to survive what nothing else would survive. He sat up slowly, movements deliberate, and reached again for the wooden tablet. His hands, still faintly marked with the Nephilim's bruises, shook slightly as he picked up a piece of charcoal. Beside the 230 vertical hash marks, he drew a new symbol, horizontal and symbolic. A simple curve, like a wave cresting, like rising water, like judgment deferred but indelibly promised. He stared at the mark for a long moment, then whispered into the surrounding darkness. Not yet, but someday when the count is finished, when the mercy finally runs dry, water. He did not understand the entire design. He didn't know the specific when, how, or even the exact why. But for the first time in a very long time, perhaps since his wife Edna had died, perhaps even longer, he had been granted a glimpse of the ending. A sense that his impossible years were not random, not meaningless suffering, but an intentional process, a slow, deliberate accumulation of drops filling a preordained cup. And there was a boy coming. A boy who would need the world to hold itself together just a little longer. A boy who would need time to be conceived, to be born, to grow, and eventually, to receive an impossible commission from the eternal God. A boy who would build an ark while the world laughed. Just as Methuselah lived, while the world cursed him. When morning arrived, Methuselah rose possessing something he hadn't experienced in decades. Not quite hope, the vision was too terrible for that, filled as it was with drowning and finality, but purpose. Renewed, sharp purpose. A sense that the burden he carried was not arbitrary cruelty, but necessary mercy. Every year he breathed brought that boy 1 year closer to his birth. Every mark he carved bought the world one more chance to turn from its profound wickedness. Every insult he endured, every thrown stone, every encounter with corruption and arrogant evil. All of it was buying time. Time for a plan that had been set in motion before he was even born, since his own father had named him. When he dies, it shall be sent. He wrapped the precious tablet carefully in its cloth binding and tucked it into his traveling bag. He gathered his few necessary possessions, dried food, a water skin, a spare cloak, and stepped out of the cave mouth into the cool morning light. The sun was just cresting the eastern hills, painting the harsh world in deceiving shades of gold and rose. Below, in the vast valley, the city of Enoch sprawled, corrupt, teeming with violence, and utterly oblivious to the judgment that ticked closer with every breath Methuselah took. Somewhere in that city or another city beyond the horizon, a child might be born today who would grow up to father the boy from his vision, or perhaps that boy's grandfather. Time felt strange now, measured not by the normal progression of seasons but by the slow, inexorable accumulation of marks on cedar wood. Count them, Methuselah whispered to himself, repeating the instruction he had received at the glowing tree centuries ago. Bear them, remember them. He touched the fresh, tender bruises on his wrist, the painful reminder of the Nephilim's mocking grip, the creature's grinding laughter, his declaration that the silent God would never speak. But he will speak. Methuselah knew it now with an unshakable certainty. God will speak. And when he does, when that final, decisive word is pronounced, when the last measure of mercy is dispensed, when the tablet is finally full, and when Methuselah's ancient, weary heart stops beating, then the mountains will melt, the fountains of the deep will break open, and the windows of heaven will pour forth. Everything the Nephilim have proudly built will wash away like sand before a tidal wave. Year 231 begins today, and somewhere in the dark, wicked world below, events are moving slowly, invisibly, but inevitably toward the moment when a man named Noah will be born. When that man will hear God's voice in a world that has willfully forgotten how to listen. When that man will build an impossible vessel on dry land while everyone mocks and no one believes. And Methuselah will be there. He must live to see it because the count is not yet finished. The tablet is not yet full. The mercy has not yet run out. He turned his face toward the rising sun, allowing its restorative warmth to touch his impossibly preserved skin, and began the long descent toward the valley, toward another year, toward another mark, toward the slow, patient, inexorable march toward the day when he dies, and everything is sent. 200 years passed in a slow, agonizing bleed of time. Each year carved its presence into Methuselah's inner consciousness just as surely as the marks were carved on his wooden tablet. Each decade was a profound weight that never manifested on his physical body but crushed something deeper within him, something for which human language had no name. Methuselah was now 430 years old. The sheer number was incomprehensible even to him. He had lived through the violent rise and catastrophic fall of entire local cultures, watched languages evolve, twist, and die, seen mountains visibly wear down and vast rivers change their entrenched courses. The world of his youth, the simple agrarian communities, the quiet, instinctive reverence for the divine, the fundamental decency that once governed human interaction, was so completely erased that it might as well have been a forgotten dream. What had replaced it was a nightmare made manifest. The cities had metastasized into cesspools of violence so pervasive, so routine, that murder in the open streets drew no more attention than someone carelessly spilling wine. The Nephilim no longer simply ruled. They had cemented a hierarchy of crushing tyranny, with lesser giants serving greater ones, and humans serving all of them as slaves, playthings, or readily available prey. Temples dedicated to hideous, false gods squatted malevolently on every prominent hilltop. Their altars were continually stained with fresh blood from sacrifices that would have been utterly unthinkable in the simple piety of Methuselah's early years. And the wickedness, the sheer, concentrated spiritual evil that permeated every interaction, every transaction, every breath of air, had reached a saturation point where Methuselah sometimes wondered if he was the last man left on earth who even retained a memory of what goodness looked like. But he was not entirely alone. Not quite, because Noah now existed. Noah, his great-grandson through Lamech's line, was a grown man now, 50 years old, married to a woman named Naamah, and the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Noah was righteous, not perfect perhaps, but undeniably righteous. In a world actively drowning in relentless corruption, Noah stood like a solitary, defiant tree on a barren, storm-swept hillside, conspicuous, vulnerable, and miraculously alive. Methuselah had watched him grow from the small boy glimpsed in his vision into a man who prayed when everyone else blasphemed, who dealt with strict honesty when everyone else cheated, who spoke uncomfortable truth when everyone else trafficked only in profitable lies. And Methuselah had known since that pivotal vision in the cave 2 centuries ago, that this man was the hinge upon which everything turned. This man was the reason for the long waiting. This man was what all these impossible, agonizing years had been purchasing time for. The small village where Noah lived was in utter chaos this morning. Methuselah approached slowly, his heavy staff tapping rhythmically against the packed earth of the road. He did not need the staff for support. His legs are still strong, his back still straight, but it gives him something to lean on when the weight of centuries becomes too much to bear upright. As he crests the hill overlooking the settlement, he sees the crowd, hundreds of people packed into the central square, their voices a cacophony of mockery and rage. The air tastes of stale wine and resentment. And at the center of it all, Noah stands beside something that makes Methuselah's breath catch in his throat, freezing the air in his ancient lungs. The ark, not finished, far from the completion required for entry, but undeniable. The skeleton of a massive vessel rises from the ground like the rib cage of some impossible beast, a defiant monument to the unseen. Cedar beams as thick as a man's body form the framework, stretching higher and longer than any structure Methuselah has ever seen, dwarfing the surrounding buildings. 3 full stories are visible even in this crude, unfinished state. The scale is overwhelming, absurd, a colossal testament to defiant faith, and Noah stands beside it. His sons are working tirelessly behind him, oblivious or simply indifferent to the crowd's fury, hammering and sawing and refusing to yield. Methuselah pushes through the dense, volatile crowd. People recognize him immediately. They always do. And a ripple of whispered curses follows him like a chill wind. The undying, the omen, death himself walks among them. But they part for him instinctively, whether out of primal fear of his impossible age or a morbid respect for the shadow he casts. He doesn't know and doesn't care. He reaches the front of the crowd and sees his great-grandson's face clearly. Noah is weathered, deeply tanned, his beard matted, his hands split and bleeding from months of relentless, grueling work under the sun. But his eyes are clear, determined, absolutely unafraid. The eyes of a man who has looked into the abyss and heard God speaking from within it. A man in expensive, richly embroidered robes, some local official or high priest of the prevailing degenerate cult, stands on a hastily constructed raised platform, addressing the throng. His voice is trained for oratory, honed for manipulation, carrying easily over the noise. Look at this madman. Look at what he builds. A boat in the middle of dry land, miles from any ocean, from any navigable water. And why? He spins dramatically, gesturing mockingly at Noah with an open, contemptuous hand. Tell them again, prophet. Tell them why you continue to build this monstrosity. Noah's voice is steady, though Methuselah can discern the underlying exhaustion, the immense fatigue born of 12 decades of mockery. Because God told me to. Because judgment is coming swiftly. Because the wickedness of this world has finally reached its fullness. The measure is complete. And God will cleanse the earth with water. This ark will save my family and 2 of every living creature. Everyone else. He pauses, allowing his steady gaze to sweep deliberately across the sea of jeering, hate-filled faces. Everyone else will drown unless they repent and seek refuge. The crowd erupts instantaneously. Laughter, vulgar jeering, obscenities hurled like sharp, jagged stones. Someone throws actual refuse. Rotted vegetables that splatter wetly against the ark's massive cedar frame. Where's your flood, prophet? A woman with a harsh, screaming voice cries out. The sky is clear. The ground is bone dry. You're insane. Mad like his ancestor. Another voice shouts, full of venom. The undying's bloodline is cursed. They're all touched by demons. The official raises his hands for silence. An oily, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. You claim your God speaks to you. You claim he's told you the world will drown. But your God has been silent for centuries. Silent while we've built our glorious cities. Silent while the mighty ones, the Nephilim, have walked among us and brought us knowledge and power. Where is this God of yours, Noah? Why doesn't he show himself if he's so desperately concerned with our wickedness? Noah opens his mouth to respond, perhaps to offer a final plea for reason. But another voice slices through the din of the crowd, ancient, resonant, carrying a weight that makes even the loudest mockers pause and look around uneasily. He's here. Methuselah steps forward, his staff striking the dusty ground with an audible thud accompanying each word, grounding the ancient authority in the present moment. He's been here the whole time, watching, counting, waiting for the final tally. The crowd turns as one. The official's practiced, theatrical grin falters, replaced by a sudden, thin look of apprehension as he recognizes Methuselah, the undeniable living legend. Of course you'd support this madness, old man. You who claim to have lived for centuries. You who say your death will signal the end of the world. More delusions from a cursed bloodline. Mere superstition clung to buy the obsolete. Methuselah, ignoring the official entirely, climbs onto a smooth, flat stone positioned beside the ark's looming frame. He ignores the soul-deep ache of carrying a truth that no one wants to hear, a truth too immense to be contained in simple words. His voice, when he finally speaks, carries across the square with an inescapable authority born not just of time, but of 430 years of continuous, solitary breathing in a world that sought his end. I have lived 430 years. For 130 years I have buried everyone I've ever loved. My wife, my son, my friends. I have watched this world descend from foolishness into calculated wickedness, from wickedness into systemic corruption, from corruption into absolute, deliberate evil. And God has kept me alive for one reason only, so that when I die you will know, without question, that it is finished. Terrible, profound silence descends. Even the most hardened mockers have fallen quiet, captivated by the raw, immutable fact of his presence. The official's face is pale, his composure shattered. And you claim to know the day of your death? I don't know the day, Methuselah says, and his voice drops to something almost gentle, almost mournful. But God does. I am 430 years old, and I've counted every single one of those years. Every year is a mark on this tablet. He pulls out the wooden plank, worn smooth now from centuries of handling, covered entirely with 430 careful, deep grooves. Every mark is a year of mercy granted to this world. Every year I breathe is a year God says, not yet. But when my last breath leaves me, when this tablet is full and I close my eyes for the final time, that day the sky will open. That day the deep will break forth. That day, everything you've built on wickedness, all your mighty cities and achievements, will wash away. The crowd stirs, deeply uncomfortable now. The sheer, impossible presence of Methuselah, his unchanging appearance, the undeniable weight of accumulated years. It forces even the most cynical to wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, he speaks the terrifying truth. A priest, clad in the symbols of a pagan nature cult, shouts out from the throng, desperate to break the rising fear. If your God is so merciful, why would he drown the world? Why not simply change our hearts? He did speak, Methuselah says quietly, his tone sorrowful, not angry. He spoke to my father Enoch. He speaks constantly to my great-grandson Noah. He speaks through the very fact that I am still standing here after 4 centuries, still breathing, still bearing witness to the truth, but you won't listen. You call truth madness. You call righteousness insanity. You look at a man building an ark and laugh at the absurdity instead of asking why. So God will speak one more time, a final, undeniable time, in a language even you will understand. And what language is that? The official demands, trying to recapture his authoritative posture. Methuselah meets his eyes unflinchingly. Judgment. The word falls into the square like a stone into a deep well, and the echoes spread outward in ripples of pure, paralyzing unease. Then someone laughs. A forced, brittle, panicked sound, and the fragile spell breaks. The mockery resumes immediately, louder now, more desperate, as if the sheer volume of their jeers can drown out the seed of paralyzing doubt Methuselah's words have planted. The crowd begins to disperse, the tension too much to bear. Some throw final, impotent insults. Others simply shake their heads, murmuring about the eccentricity of the ancients, and return to their daily wickedness as if nothing significant has occurred. Noah approaches Methuselah as the square empties. Up close, he looks even more utterly exhausted, his eyes shadowed, his shoulders bowed under a spiritual and physical weight that far exceeds the burden of the cedar beams. "Grandfather," he says quietly. "You're building well," Methuselah says, his gaze steady on the ark's massive frame. "Faster than I expected, actually." Noah's voice is strained, taut with stress. "Not fast enough. Every day they come. Every day they mock and threaten. My sons." He glances back at where Shem, Ham, and Japheth continue their work, their figures small against the towering structure. "They believe because I believe, but sometimes, late at night, I see a flicker of doubt in their eyes. Sometimes I wake in the night and wonder if I have gone utterly mad, if I imagined God's voice entirely." Methuselah grips Noah's shoulder firmly, the strength in his ancient hand surprising. "You're not mad. And you didn't imagine anything, Noah. I've seen it myself. 200 years ago, I saw this ark in a blinding vision. I saw it floating, buoyant upon the churning water, while the world drowned below. I saw you and your sons and their wives safe inside. This is real. This is happening as surely as the sun rises." Noah's eyes fill immediately with tears of profound relief mixed with fear. How much longer? How long until? He can't bring himself to finish the question, the implications too vast. Methuselah pulls out his tablet and shows Noah the markings. 430 grooves meticulously carved into the cedar. Then he shows the remaining blank space, the untouched wood below the final mark. "I don't know how much longer, decades perhaps, maybe even longer. But when this wood is completely full, when there is no more room left for marks, then it is time." That night, after sitting with Noah's family around their simple fire, after the meager meal and the endless, anxious questions from Noah's sons, Methuselah and Noah sit alone under the expanse of the cold, silent stars. The ark's immense skeleton looms in the dense darkness, a colossal promise or a colossal delusion, depending entirely on who is viewing it. "I'm afraid," Noah says quietly, his voice barely a rasp. "Not of dying, not even of the flood, terrifying as it will be, but of failing. What if I complete this massive ark and God doesn't send the water? What if I've dedicated my entire life, 120 years, to something that never comes to pass?" Methuselah is quiet for a long, heavy moment, listening to the vast silence of the waiting world. Then he speaks. "I've been called worse for 430 years. I've been called cursed, demon-possessed, utterly mad. My own people spit at me, children throw stones in the street. And every single day I wake up and the world is still here, still wicked, still mocking my existence. Sometimes I truly wonder if they are right. If I'm just a man who has lived far too long and convinced himself his endless madness has some divine meaning." "But you believe," Noah replies, pressing him. "Despite everything, despite all the waiting, you still believe." "Yes." Methuselah pulls out his tablet one more time, running his finger along the grooves. "Because I remember the tree that glowed with unnatural light. I remember my father disappearing into an ascending column of pure light. I remember the voice that told me, "Every year is mercy." And I remember the vision of your face, Noah, standing upright in an ark while the whole world drowned below. I believe because I've seen too much undeniable evidence not to believe. He stands slowly, painfully, feeling every one of his 430 years settle upon him in a way that has nothing to do with physical vitality. Keep building, Noah. Don't stop. Don't allow doubt to enter your soul. Even when I'm gone, especially when I'm gone, keep building. Because when my heart finally stops, you'll have 7 days. Just 7 days of grace. And then the rain begins. Noah looks up sharply, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. 7 days? How do you know that number? Methuselah smiles sadly, a profound weariness in his eyes. I don't know with certainty. It is only what I feel, a deep, persistent knowing. When I die, count exactly to 7. On the 7th day, enter the ark, and seal the door behind you. He walks away into the complete darkness of the night, leaving Noah sitting alone by the dying fire. Behind him, the ghost of Hammer-on would echoes across the sleeping valley. The steady, determined, faithful sound of a man building impossible hope while the world continues to laugh itself toward oblivion. Methuselah walks until he is alone again with the vast, cold night, the indifferent stars, and the crushing, impossible weight of 430 years of accumulated time. He finds a flat stone and sits, pulling out his tablet one last time. By starlight, he examines the marks. 430 grooves precisely carved, and below them, the wave symbol he drew 200 years ago, still faintly visible, still waiting for its moment of fulfillment. How much longer? He whispers to the silent, unanswering sky. No answer comes. It never does. But somewhere in the darkness, he feels it acutely. The approaching edge, the drawing near of something final and absolute. Not tomorrow, perhaps not next year, but closer now than it has ever been in the entire span of his life. The ark is being built. The righteous man is preparing. The pieces are relentlessly falling into their appointed place. 300 years pass. The number has long since lost all discernible meaning. Time has ceased to be a linear progression. It has become a prison with walls that never move, a sentence that stretches beyond human comprehension into something that feels less like true living and more like mere existing in perpetual, unchanging twilight. Methuselah is now 730 years old. The sheer, monumental weight of that age should have killed him, should have extinguished his life centuries ago. But his heart keeps beating with the same steady, relentless rhythm it had when he was a strong, young man of 40. His ancient lungs keep drawing breath. His eyes keep seeing a world he no longer recognizes and increasingly wishes he could not see at all. The ark is nearly complete now. 120 years Noah has worked on it. 120 years of relentless, back-breaking labor, of mockery endured, of faith tested to the breaking point and, miraculously, somehow not breaking. The vessel is massive beyond any human description. Its 3 decks are sealed meticulously with pitch inside and out. Its chambers are prepared for the animals that will soon arrive, drawn by an unseen force. Its rooms are ready for the 8 souls who will survive what nothing else survives. But Methuselah barely notices the ark anymore. He lives in a crude cave now, higher in the mountains, further from human habitation and wickedness than ever before. The isolation is both a crushing burden and a necessary blessing. He can no longer bear the sight of the low-lying cities, the constant sound of human voices raised in blasphemy and casual violence, the ubiquitous cruelty that has become as natural and necessary as breathing to the people of this degenerate age. The Nephilim, the giants of old, have multiplied beyond counting. Their offspring, even more twisted, even more powerful and imposing, rule every settlement, control every trade route, and own every scrap of arable land. And where they don't rule directly, their deep corruption spreads like a toxic rot through wood, infecting everything it touches until the society is structurally unsound. The worst part isn't the open violence or the widespread idolatry or even the rampant sexual perversity that would have been unimaginable in his youth. The worst part is the forgetting. No one remembers anything different. The young people born into this saturated world think this evil is normal. They possess no cultural or moral reference point for goodness. They have no memory of a time when people dealt honestly with each other, when children were safe, when the name of God was spoken with reverence instead of vicious mockery. Evil has become so utterly normalized, so woven into the fabric of life, so pervasive that righteousness now looks like outright insanity. Noah's family, those 8 souls preparing to enter the massive ark, are viewed not as the sane ones in an insane world, but as madmen in a world that believes it has finally achieved supreme enlightenment. Methuselah sits at the wide entrance to his cave as the sun makes its final, slow descent, painting the western sky in terrible shades of blood and copper. He holds the wooden tablet in his lap, no longer smooth, but worn rough and porous from 7 centuries of ceaseless handling. 730 marks cover the surface, carved so close together in some places that they blur into a single, continuous groove of suffering. He's had to extend the tablet twice over the long centuries, adding new pieces of wood lashed together with brittle leather cords because the original plank ran out of space long ago. The thing is unwieldy now, heavy, a profound, physical manifestation of the impossible burden he carries. He pulls out his chisel, the very same one he's used for centuries, reforged and resharpened so many times that it's half the size it once was, and prepares to add mark number 731. But his hand doesn't move. It hovers over the scarred wood, trembling violently, not with age or physical weakness, but with something far deeper. Exhaustion. Soul-deep, spirit-crushing exhaustion that goes far beyond simple physical tiredness into something that threatens the very will to continue existing. I can't, he whispers to the empty, uncaring air. I can't do this anymore. I can't carve another mark. I can't live another year. I can't watch this world get darker, more hateful. I can't. His voice breaks completely. The chisel slips from his nerveless hand and clatters loudly on the cold, stone floor of the cave. He buries his face in his hands, drawing his knees up to his chest. And for the first time in perhaps a century, he weeps. Not quiet, self-pitying tears, but great, racking sobs that shake his entire, enduring body. The sound tears from his chest like something physical being ripped out. 730 years of accumulated grief, of unrelenting loneliness, of watching everyone he's ever known or loved turn to dust while he inexplicably remains. 730 years of being called cursed, demon-possessed, an abomination against nature. 730 years of carrying mercy for a world that doesn't want it, doesn't recognize it, and would surely spit on it if they understood what it was. Please, he gasps between sobs, the sound desperate and raw. Please, God, please let me die. I've done what you asked. I've counted every year. I've borne witness faithfully. I've carved every mark. But I can't. I simply can't anymore. I'm so tired. I'm so alone. Everyone is gone. Edna's been dust for 600 years. Lamech's grave is so old and unmarked I can't even find it anymore. My great-great-great-grandchildren don't know my name or fear my presence. I'm a ghost in a world that has no place for ghosts. Please, please let me rest. The silence that follows is absolute and profound. No wind, no distant voice, no comfort. Just the dying light, his ragged, broken breathing, and the terrible, crushing awareness that tomorrow he'll wake up, and the next day, and the next, and the count will continue because the count always continues until it doesn't. He doesn't know how long he sits there, hunched over the tablet in his lap, the chisel lying abandoned on the ground beside him. Hours perhaps. The sun fully sets. The cold, ancient stars emerge. The same stars that shone when he was born, that will surely shine long after he's finally gone. Cold seeps into the cave. He should light a fire, should force himself to eat something, should perform any of the small, necessary tasks that constitute survival, but he doesn't move. He can't move. The spiritual weight is too much, too paralyzing. Then he hears it. Footsteps on the steep, winding path leading to his cave. Slow, deliberate footsteps, accompanied by the heavy, labored breathing of an old man struggling against gravity. Someone is climbing to find him. Methuselah doesn't bother to look up. He doesn't care who it is or what they want. Let them come. Let them mock or attack or whatever their purpose is. He has nothing left to give, nothing left to protect. Grandfather. Noah's voice. Methuselah's head jerks up sharply. His great-grandson stands framed at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the wash of cold starlight. Noah is 170 years old now, ancient by the standards of this fallen age, though still incredibly young compared to Methuselah. His beard is fully white, his back slightly bent, his hands gnarled and scarred from decades of continuous, demanding construction. But his eyes are still clear, still determined, still carrying that impossible, resilient faith that Methuselah both profoundly admires and bitterly envies. Noah. Methuselah's voice comes out rough, broken by his recent tears. You shouldn't have climbed all the way up here. It's too dangerous in the darkness. I had to come. I had a dream. Noah enters the cave, moving slowly, lowering himself carefully to sit across from Methuselah with visible, painful effort. 3 nights now, the same dream. I see you here alone, weeping. I see the tablet in your lap. And I see. He pauses, his expression troubled, focusing on the dark wood. I see empty space. Just a little. Not much, but empty space at the very end of all those marks. Methuselah looks down at the tablet resting in his lap. Noah is correct. Despite the 730 marks, despite the haphazard extensions lashed on with leather, there is still a small, visible section of blank, untouched wood at the very end. Maybe space for 50 more marks. Maybe 100, maybe 200. He's never counted exactly how much remains. He's been profoundly afraid to count, afraid to know the final tally. The ark is completely finished, Noah says quietly, confirming the news. Every board in place, every seal complete. The ramp is ready. The chambers are prepared. Everything God commanded me to do, it's done. And now I wait. We all wait. My sons, their wives, Enigma. We wake each morning and wonder if today is the day. If today the animals will start coming. If today the sky will darken. If today. He stops, then continues more softly, forcing the dreadful word out. Adun, if today you'll die. The words hang heavy in the cold, still air. Methuselah finally picks up the chisel from where it fell. His hand is noticeably steadier now. I'm sorry, he says, his voice thick with shame. I'm sorry you've tied your monumental fate to mine. I'm sorry you've built your life around waiting for an old man to stop breathing. Don't apologize. Noah leans forward, and there's unexpected steel in his voice, despite his physical exhaustion. Everything I've done because God commanded it. Not because of you, not because of prophecy or visions or signs. Because God spoke directly to me and told me to build an ark. The fact that your life is connected to the timing. That's God's design, grandfather, not your burden alone. But what if I live another 200 years? Another 300? What if there's more space on this tablet than either of us can bear to see? What if you die of natural causes before I do, and your sons have to carry your faith and their sons after them, and the ark just sits there, slowly rotting while I keep breathing and breathing, and the world keeps getting irrevocably worse? Noah is quiet for a long moment, contemplating the horrifying possibility of endless, futile waiting. Then that's what happens, and we'll have built the ark in perfect obedience, even if we never see the rain. He takes a breath, his resolve firm. But I don't believe that, grandfather. I don't believe God would command me to build for 120 years just to let the vessel rot. I don't believe he's kept you alive for 7 centuries just to continue another 7. Something is coming. I feel it deep in my bones. The world feels it. Even the animals feel it. They're restless, moving in migratory patterns that make no immediate sense, as if preparing for something vast and terrible that they don't yet understand. Methuselah looks at his great-grandson. This man who has sacrificed everything for faith, who has endured constant mockery and profound isolation and the gnawing cancer of self-doubt, who has poured his entire adult life into a project the whole world calls madness. And he sees something in Noah's worn face that he hasn't seen in his own reflection for centuries. Hope. Not naive hope or blind, easy optimism, but the kind of hope that has been tested by fire, refined by time, and somehow survived the unsurvivable. You're stronger than me, Methuselah says quietly, the admission heavy with humility. You always have been. No. Noah shakes his head firmly. I'm standing on 730 years of your strength. Every single year you've lived has bought me time. Time to be born. Time to grow up. Time to hear God's voice clearly. Time to build this massive vessel. I'm not stronger, grandfather. I'm just the one who gets to finally see the fruit of your suffering. Methuselah feels something profound shift inside him. Not a complete release from the burden, the weight is still crushing, still impossible, but a slight redistribution, a crucial sharing. He is not carrying this solitary burden alone anymore. Noah carries it too, in his own way, through the final, dreadful act of waiting. Those 8 souls preparing to enter the ark, they carry it. Even the mockers in the valley below, oblivious as they are, carry it in the unfathomable mercy they receive without knowing its source or its cost. He positions the chisel against the seasoned wood and strikes. The sound, stark and unforgiving, echoes in the cavern's deep silence. Sharp, clear, and final. Mark number 730. Another measured year passes. Another weary measure of divine patience. Another undeserved breath of mercy granted to a world that has long forfeited any claim to it. Thank you for coming, Methuselah says, the effort of speech palpable as he sets the heavy chisel aside. Thank you for climbing all this way just to sit in the gloom with an old man who has, by all logic, long forgotten how to sustain hope. You haven't forgotten, Noah insists, rising slowly, his aging joints protesting the movement with soft, brittle creaks. You are still carving those marks. That is the definition of hope, grandfather, even when the heart feels hollowed out and certainty is gone. He moves to the cave entrance, then pauses, turning back to the tablet resting in the shadowed corner. The empty space remaining on that slate. It isn't much, is it? Not much at all. 50 years, maybe, perhaps even less. I do not think either of us will need to wait much longer for the promised end. After Noah's silhouette disappears into the desert glare, Methuselah sinks down in the darkness, staring fixedly at the tablet for a long time. He confirms his great-grandson's assessment, running his calloused fingers across the cedar grain, measuring the remaining blank space like a miser counting his final coins. Noah was right. Maybe 50 marks worth of room. 60 at the absolute most. 50 to 60 years. For most short-lived men, that span represents a complete, full lifetime. For him, it is barely a fleeting heartbeat in the vast, overwhelming expanse of centuries he has already endured. But it is also, finally, an ending. A visible, countable ending. He can see the edge of the wood now. He can count the precise steps remaining until he reaches it. He wraps the precious tablet carefully in worn cloth and places it in the corner where he keeps his few, essential possessions. Then he lies down on his sleeping mat, staring up at the cave ceiling where shadows dance from the small, welcome fire he has finally allowed himself to build. And for the first time in decades, perhaps even centuries, the crushing weight of prophecy lifts slightly, and he sleeps without nightmares. The ending is coming. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. It is visible on the horizon, real, a single distant light at the end of a 700-year-long tunnel of oppressive solitude. When he wakes the next morning, something profound has shifted within the depths of his ancient soul. The crushing weight of the world's wickedness is still there. It is a burden that will never truly leave him until his last breath. But underneath it, barely perceptible, is a new sensation, a tiny spark. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps its distant, more pragmatic cousin, endurance. The absolute, unshakable knowledge that he can bear this for 50 more years, that 50 more marks are possible, that the end, however distant, is no longer incomprehensibly far off. He steps out of the cave into the sharp, purifying morning light and looks down at the valley floor where Noah's Ark sits. It is massive, an impossible, preposterous structure, ready, waiting, just like Methuselah himself, waiting for the final count to be completed, waiting for the great mercy to finally run out, waiting for God to speak his final, defining word. And in the distance, storm clouds are beginning to gather on the horizon. They have been gathering for weeks now, unnatural clouds that appear and disappear, moving against the prevailing winds, seeming to slowly, inexorably surround the entire world in a gathering, ominous ring. No one in the valley notices them, consumed by their immediate sins. Or if they do, they dismiss them with a shrug, just whether a natural phenomenon, anything except what they actually are. The first whispers of divine judgment, the advanced guard of the coming flood, the physical manifestation of patience that has finally stretched to its breaking point. Methuselah watches the toxic purples and greens of the churning sky and feels a cold certainty settle deep in his chest. Not 50 years, he realizes. Probably not even 20. The space on the tablet is shrinking faster than the actual would suggest, compressed by divine purpose into something tighter, more urgent. He doesn't know the exact hour, he has never known the exact hour. But soon, very soon, he will carve the final mark. He will close his eyes, and 7 days later, the rain will begin. 39 years pass like the final, precious grains of sand through an hourglass held by a trembling hand. Each one is counted, each one weighted, each one bringing the world closer to an edge it doesn't even know exists. Methuselah is 769 years old. The number should be impossible, a cosmic joke, a contradiction of all natural law. And yet he wakes each morning and his heart still beats its laborious rhythm, and his lungs still draw breath. And another day begins that he was certain he would not live to see. The tablet is nearly full now. 769 marks cover every inch of the cedar, carved so densely in places that they have fused together, becoming a single, continuous groove of recorded history. Only a tiny space remains at the very end. Room for perhaps 10 more marks, perhaps 20 if he were to carve them impossibly small. He studies this final sliver obsessively now, running his fingers over the smooth, unmarked wood multiple times each day, as if touch might somehow reveal exactly how many years remain hidden in that final, terrifying blankness. The world has long since passed a breaking point. Violence is no longer occasional or shocking. It is constant, ubiquitous, the very warp and weft of human interaction. The Nephilim have bred so extensively that their tainted, hybrid bloodlines run through nearly every family. The old restraints, fear of divine punishment, social shame, basic human empathy, have completely dissolved into the mire. People kill for pleasure and sport. They enslave for fleeting convenience. They commit acts that would have been unthinkable even in Methuselah's corrupted youth and think nothing of it, feel nothing about it, considering it simply the natural, dominant way the world works. But something else is happening, too. Something quiet and miraculous. The animals are moving. For months now, Methuselah has watched from his desolate mountain cave as creatures of every kind have been migrating in strange, preternatural patterns. Birds that should instinctually fly south are flying north. Predators that should be hunting are traveling peacefully alongside their natural prey. Wolves walking shoulder to shoulder with lambs, enormous lions moving silently among herds of cattle, bears lumbering through valleys where they have never been sighted before, and they are all moving in the exact same direction. Toward Noah's Arkansas. Methuselah makes the arduous journey down from his cave on a morning when the sky above the valley is the color of old bruises, purple and yellow and sickly green, clouds that should not exist, hanging motionless despite the restless wind. His legs are still unnaturally strong, his back unervingly straight, but something in his chest feels different today. Tighter, heavier, sharper. As if his impossibly long-lived heart is preparing itself for a fate it has known was coming for 769 years. When he reaches the valley where the ark stands, a structure now fully finished, final, waiting, he stops and simply stares. 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high, 3 full decks sealed tight with a single massive door in the side and a window running around the top deck. Complete. Final. Waiting. Noah sees him approaching and descends the ramp, moving carefully, slowly. He is 209 years old now, and unlike Methuselah, he shows every single year of it. His beard is white as mountain snow, his body stooped, his movements slow and agonizing. But his eyes still burn with a faith that hasn't dimmed despite 2 centuries of grinding labor and relentless mockery. "Grandfather," he says, his voice hoarse and worn like aged leather. "I hoped you would come. I had to." Methuselah looks past Noah to where his sons and their wives are moving the final supplies into the looming vessel. It's close now, Noah. Very close. Noah nods, slowly, gravely. I know. The animals are gathering. Have you seen them? Hundreds already in the quiet hills. Thousands more coming. Pairs of every kind, just as God commanded. They started arriving 3 days ago, circling the ark. Waiting. Waiting for what? Noah meets his eyes, his gaze steady. Waiting for you. A sudden commotion rises from the main path below. Voices raised in anger and mockery, growing louder, growing closer as a substantial crowd approaches. Methuselah and Noah turn together to see a mob of at least 100 people. Maybe more, charging toward the ark, led by a massive Nephilim whose shadow falls across the ground like a spreading stain of corruption. This giant is even larger than any Methuselah has encountered. 10 feet tall, shoulders like slabs of living stone, eyes that burn with cold intelligence and searing malice in equal, terrifying measure. The crowd behind him carries smoking torches despite the daylight, clubs and heavy stones, their faces twisted with fury at the looming presence of the ark. A silent, insurmountable rebuke to their chosen way of life. The Nephilim stops 20 paces away. His features are wrong in ways that make Methuselah's ancient skin crawl. They are too symmetrical, too perfectly rendered, as if an artisan who didn't quite grasp the essence of human anatomy tried to create a flawless face from a corrupted memory. When he speaks, his voice resonates with grinding, deep harmonics that physically hurt to hear. 209 years, Noah. 209 years you've been building this ludicrous monument to your delusion. Where is your flood, prophet? Where is the judgment your invisible God promised? Noah's voice, though weary, is steady, refusing to break. It's coming. The animals know it. They are gathering even now at your feet. Animals. The Nephilim throws his head back and laughs. A sound like grinding stone on stone, abrasive and hateful. Confused creatures wandering in circles. You see divine purpose in natural phenomena. You are hopelessly insane. And yet you're here. Methuselah says quietly, stepping forward, placing himself between the mob and the ark's ramp. The crowd notices him for the first time, and a ripple of horrified whispers runs through them. The undying. The one who lived before our fathers. 700 years old. The Nephilim's burning gaze shifts, focusing its terrible intensity on Methuselah, and something like cold recognition flickers in those inhuman eyes. Ah, the man who won't die. Tell me, old man, in 700 years of living, how many times has your God spoken directly to you? How many times has he shown himself in glory? Methuselah feels his heart hammering in his chest, harder and more irregularly than it should. It is skipping rhythms, uneven, as if something inside is finally beginning to break down after 7 centuries of impossible function. He has spoken to me twice, once through my father, Enoch, and once at a tree that glowed with divine, pure fire. That is all. 2 times in 769 years. Twice. The Nephilim straightens, spreading his colossal arms in a gesture of scorn toward the mob. Now twice in almost 8 centuries. What kind of God is so painfully silent? The kind, Methuselah says, and his voice rises, clear and ringing despite the new, sharp pain growing in his chest. The kind of God who is so patient that he gives mercy even when it is flagrantly not deserved. Every year I've lived has been a year of grace for this wicked world. Every single breath I've taken has been God saying, not yet. There's still time to repent, time to turn back. But the time is finally running out. Running out? The Nephilim laughs again. A sound of mocking thunder. You're old, Methuselah. Impossibly old. But you are not immortal. Someday you will die like everything dies, and the world will continue exactly as it is now. The crowd roars its approval, a wave of savage sound. Someone throws a stone. It strikes the ark's cedar side with a hollow, resounding thunk. Noah's sons emerge from inside the vessel, protective and grim, but Noah raises his hand, stopping them. Let them mock. In 7 days they will finally understand. 7 days. The Nephilim's expression shifts entirely. amusement giving way to something darker, a focused rage. Oh, dare you? You dare give us a timeline now? Well then, prophet will give you 7 days of peace. And when the sun rises on the 8th day, and the ground is still bone dry, we will tear down your ark, board by hateful board. The mob disperses slowly, reluctantly, their fury still simmering. When they are finally gone, an absolute, profound silence settles over the valley. Noah turns to Methuselah, his face stricken with confusion and fear. Why did I say that? Why did I give them 7 days? You said it because it's true. Methuselah interrupts, the words catching in his throat. His chest is tight now, intensely painful, as if something vital inside is slowly clenching like a fist made of stone. 7 days from when I die. That is what I have always known. Noah's eyes widen in instant, dawning horror. But you're not. He stops, studying the terrifying certainty etched into Methuselah's face. Whatever he sees there makes his expression shift. Grandfather, is it time? I don't know, Methuselah says honestly, trying to draw a steady breath that refuses to come. But something feels fundamentally different. My heart, it's beating wrong. Too hard in some moments, too soft in others, skipping rhythms like a broken drummer. It has kept perfect time for 769 years. That night, Noah insists Methuselah stay within the Arkansas. They prepare a space for him inside the massive vessel. A small room near the center deck, cushioned with soft blankets, warm and dry, smelling powerfully of fresh-cut cedar and pine pitch. Methuselah lies down just as the sun sets, surrounded by Noah's family who gather to pray over him in hushed, reverent tones. As the others leave and Noah prepares to sleep nearby, Methuselah pulls out his tablet one final time. 769 marks. And at the very end, barely visible in the dim lamplight, is that single tiny sliver of unmarked wood. Space for one more mark. Maybe two if he carved them microscopically small, but probably just one. He picks up his chisel with trembling hands and positions it against the sacred wood. The metal feels heavier in his grip than it ever has before, a weight of finality. He strikes. The sound echoes sharply through the quiet, waiting arc. Sharp, clear, final. Mark number 769. The chisel slips from his fingers and falls to the wooden floor with a clatter that sounds deafening in the silence. He stares at the tablet, at the marks that represent every single year of impossible longevity, every precious measure of mercy granted. And he realizes with absolute terrifying certainty, there is no room for another mark. The wood is full. The count is complete. The mercy has run out. Noah, he whispers, and his great-grandson is instantly beside him, recognizing the sound of finality in his voice. It's done. Look. He holds up the tablet, shows him the final, deep mark, the absence of any remaining space. 769 years. The count is finished. Noah's face goes pale, stark white in the oil lamp's glow. Then that means, in 7 days. In 7 days, God stops being silent. Methuselah's chest tightens again, and this time the pain is sharp enough to make him gasp, clutching his ribs. 7 days from when I die. And Noah, I think I'm dying now. The words hang in the air like a pronouncement of ultimate judgment, because that is exactly what they are. Not just the physical death of one impossibly old man, but the end of patience, the end of mercy, the end of chances for the whole world. When Methuselah's heart finally stops its labored beating, God will count 7 days, and then he will speak his last, devastating word. And that word will be water. Methuselah dies on a Tuesday morning, exactly 7 days before the world ends. He doesn't wake in pain or struggle for a final breath or cry out in fear. He simply closes his eyes after 769 years of holding them open, watching the rising tide of sin. And his ancient heart, that impossible muscle that has beaten without stopping since before the great cities were built, before languages diverged, before wickedness became the very water in which humanity swam, finally, mercifully, stops. Noah finds him an hour after sunrise. He has been checking on his great-grandfather every few hours through the night, watching the slow decline, the breathing that grew shallower, the the pulse that grew fainter. But when he enters the small room this morning, he knows immediately. The quality of stillness is different, final, absolute. Methuselah lies on his back, hands folded across his chest, his face peaceful in a way Noah has never, in 2 centuries, seen it. The wooden tablet rests beside him, 769 marks covering every surface. The heavy chisel lies where it fell. Noah sinks to his knees beside the body and weeps. Not loud, wrenching sobs, but quiet, profound tears that fall like the first, soft drops of rain. "Thank you," he whispers, laying his head on his great-grandfather's silent chest. "Thank you for carrying this burden. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for making it possible for us to be here now, ready." When he finally emerges from the ark, his family is waiting near the ramp. Naamah sees his face and understands instantly, covering her mouth with both hands to stifle a cry. Shem, Ham, and Japheth stand frozen, and for a moment, no one moves or speaks. Then Shem says, "When?" And Noah answers, "This morning." He's at peace. The words sound terribly inadequate. The oldest witness is gone. The final countdown has officially begun. 7 days. Just 7 days until everything changes forever. They bury Methuselah that same day on a low hillside overlooking the valley where the ark sits, a monument to defiance and obedience. They dig the grave deep into the dry earth, line it with heavy stones, and lower the body wrapped carefully in clean linen. Noah places the wooden tablet, that exhaustive record of mercy, that testament to divine patience, in Methuselah's hands. As they cover the grave with dry earth, Noah notices something that makes his breath catch in his throat. Animals. They are everywhere. The entire hillside is covered with them. Creatures of every kind standing in absolute silence, watching the burial. Lions and lambs, wolves and sheep, bears and deer, predator and prey standing together without a hint of violence or fear, as if they have gathered to witness the passing of the man whose long life kept the world alive just a little longer. They stay perfectly still until the grave is completely covered and the final stone is set. And then, as if released by some silent, divine signal, they begin moving toward the ark in pairs. The next 6 days are chaos, held barely in check by invisible divine purpose. The animals come in overwhelming waves. 2 by 2 they enter the ark, filling the prepared chambers, settling into spaces that somehow accommodate them all, despite the impossibility of the logistics. Noah and his family work without stopping, guiding the endless streams of animals, securing the doors to the various compartments, making the final, urgent preparations. The people from the valley come to watch, and their mockery has shifted now to something else. Deep unease, a paralyzing fear poorly disguised as drunken bravado. They see the animals entering in perfect, obedient pairs. They see the sky growing darker and more ominous with each passing day. And some of them begin to wonder, terrifyingly, if perhaps the madman who built the wooden fortress was right after all. On the 6th day, a desperate group of perhaps 20 people approaches the Arkansas. They are not the Nephilim or the most hardened mockers, but ordinary people, farmers and craftsmen, mothers with frightened children, one young woman desperately clutching a baby. "Please," she calls out to Noah, her voice raw. "If there's room, if judgment is really coming, let us in." Noah's face crumples with profound grief. He descends the ramp and stands before them, and his voice breaks under the weight of his task. "I can't." God said only 8. Only 8 human souls. You had time. Methuselah lived 769 years. That is 769 years of undeserved mercy. 769 opportunities to turn back and seek forgiveness. And now, his voice fails completely. He can only shake his head, defeated, and slowly walk back up the ramp. On the 7th day, the sky is black. Not the soft black of night, but something else entirely. A corrosive darkness that seems to emanate from the clouds themselves. The wind has stopped completely. The silence over the entire world is absolute, oppressive, like the breath held tightly just before a scream. Noah and his family stand at the massive entrance to the ark, looking out at a world that doesn't know it has only hours left. "It's time," Noah says. Nama goes first, then their daughters-in-law, then the sons. Noah is last. He stands at the threshold for a long, silent moment, staring out at the unnatural darkness, at the crowds gathered at a distance, paralyzed by fear. 7 days? One of the Nephilim shouts, his voice edged with panic, not bravado. Your old man died 7 days ago. And where's the flood, prophet? Noah doesn't answer. He simply steps inside. And as his final foot crosses the threshold, the door, massive, made of thick cedar beams and secured with iron, swings shut entirely on its own. Not slammed by wind, not pushed by human hands, but moved by an invisible, immeasurable force that is both gentle and utterly absolute. It closes with a sound like distant thunder, a sound of divine decision, and then it seals itself. The minuscule gaps between the thick boards disappear as if the wood is growing together, fusing from the inside. Noah and his family hear a sound of divine carpentry, of creation itself reshaping matter. When the sound stops, the door is gone. There is no handle, no opening, no seam, no way out. They are sealed inside by God himself. Outside, the crowd surges forward one last time. The Nephilim reaches the hull first, pounding his colossal fists on the sealed wood. Open up. Come out. Your 7 days are up and nothings. He stops abruptly. His head tilts sharply upward. Every head in the valley tilts upward because the sky is cracking. Not like clouds breaking apart, but like the dome of heaven itself is fracturing. Like the vast firmament is splitting open under unimaginable pressure. And through those terrifying cracks comes water. Not rain, not mere droplets, but torrents, cascading columns, oceans pouring through ruptures in reality itself. At the exact same moment, the ground begins to shake with cataclysmic force. The fountains of the great deep are breaking open. Fissures appear in the dry earth, and from them erupts water under immense pressure. Geysers shooting hundreds of feet into the blackened air. The valley begins to flood within minutes. What was dry ground becomes a swirling lake, becomes a raging sea, becomes an overwhelming ocean. The water rises so fast, so violently, that people barely have time to scream. The Nephilim tries desperately to run, but the water is infinitely faster. It sweeps him off his feet, turning him end over end like a child's toy. The crowds scatter, but there is nowhere left to go. The water is everywhere at once, rising inexorably from below and falling catastrophically from above. Within an hour, the valley is completely submerged. People cling to trees that are themselves being violently uprooted. They climb hilltops that quickly become temporary islands that then become submerged, silent peaks. They scream for mercy, cry out desperately to Noah, promise anything to believe, to repent. But it is too late. 769 years too late. Inside the ark, Noah and his family feel the massive vessel begin to lift, rising on water accumulating faster than seems physically possible. They are pressed against walls, clutching support beams, listening to the horrifying sounds from outside. The screams, the relentless pounding on the pitch-sealed hull, the scraping of fingernails on the impenetrable wood. These sounds last for hours as the water continues its global ascent, as mountains themselves begin to disappear beneath the surface, as everything not sealed inside this single vessel drowns in a judgment that has been delayed for nearly 8 centuries, but will not be delayed one moment more. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the sounds fade. The screaming stops. The pounding ceases. There is only the sound of rain, endless, relentless, cosmic rain. And the deep, reassuring creaking of timbers as the ark floats on an ocean that now covers the entire world. Noah moves toward the single window high above and looks out into the tempest. All he can see is water. Water in every direction. No land, no mountains, no trace that civilization had ever existed. Outside, the vast, unforgiving expanse was just water. A churning, cold mirror reflecting a sky heavy with continuous rain. The ark was merely a vessel bobbing upon the very surface of God's absolute judgment. The unbearable weight of this reality forced Noah to his knees on the planked floor. Tears, raw and scalding, broke free without the slightest hint of restraint. They were not tears of gratitude for his own salvation. They were tears of profound, agonizing grief for everyone else, for the countless millions swept away, for the innocent children who suffered a fate they could not have deserved, for those souls who, in their final desperate moments, might have finally understood and believed, only to find that faith had arrived too late. The window of mercy slammed shut. His sorrow intensified for Methuselah, his revered great-grandfather, who had effectively carried the weight of divine patience for 769 grueling years. He died knowing that his passing would be the final, irreversible trigger for the cosmic reckoning. He was right, Noah whispered into the silence of the cabin, the words heavy with failure. Every single year he drew breath was a year of unearned mercy for us all. Every single tally mark he carved on that wooden tablet was a renewed chance for humanity. And we, collectively, were too willfully blind to seize it. We threw it all away. Nama, ever the quiet anchor, knelt immediately beside him, her hand settling firmly upon his shoulder. Her voice was a low, steady murmur against the storm's roar. "It's not over," she assured him. "Look around you. We are here. 8 souls, Noah, and 8 fresh chances to live better, to be worthy of this preservation. We are 8 people who have been given the terrifying responsibility to rebuild the world on a foundation of righteousness and obedience. This is the true reason for our salvation, not because we were flawless or uniquely good, but simply because we were willing to listen when the rest of the world hardened its heart and refused to hear the warning." Days stretched into weeks. The rain, relentless and monotonous, hammered against the roof timbers. The deep waters continued their rise, bearing the ark onward. Noah, alongside his sons and their wives, found an unexpected sanctuary in the sheer necessity of work, tending to the ceaseless needs of the vast collection of animals entrusted to their care. In the daily, exhausting rhythms of feeding, cleaning, and simply keeping life alive, Noah slowly began to find not happiness, but something resembling peace. This, he realized, was the profound truth of judgment's other side. It was not solely about destruction. It was equally about meticulous preservation. It was not merely an ending. It was the violent, necessary prelude to a new beginning. One evening, exactly 40 days after the rains first commenced, Noah felt compelled to return to the small, silent room where Methuselah had breathed his last. He lowered himself onto the spot where his great-grandfather's frail body had rested, seeking connection in the quiet space. From within the folds of his robe, he carefully retrieved a treasured, salvaged artifact. A tiny, insignificant piece of the shattered wooden tablet. It had been broken away from the corner, yet on its surface, 5 faint tally marks were still distinctly visible. 5 out of a monumental 769. "You weren't cursed," Noah murmured to the powerful, enduring memory of his ancestor. "You were, in fact, the most extraordinary blessing this depraved world ever received." And they were too oblivious, too entrenched in their evil, to ever grasp it. Every arduous year you suffered was a year of life granted to someone else. Every single day you endured mockery and dismissed the scorn of a generation was a day God mercifully stayed the terrifying descent of his hand. You were mercy incarnate, grandfather, a living, breathing reprieve. And the moment you finally yielded, the instant the greatest mercy available ceased to exist, judgment fell immediately, relentlessly, like this rain that knows no end. He gazed down at the worn fragment, concentrating on the 5 faint indentations, and made a silent, profound commitment. When they finally disembarked from the ark, when the great deluge receded and they stood upon the freshly consecrated dry ground, he would plant a vibrant, living tree directly over this splintered fragment. It would stand as a permanent, sacred memorial to Methuselah, whose name echoed the terrible promise. When he dies, it shall be sent. His life was the longest warning ever issued, the most profoundly patient act of mercy, the final, agonizing countdown before the irreversible transformation of creation. Outside the thick hull, a miracle of subtlety began to unfold. The furious sound of the downpour started to lessen, softening from a violent roar to a dull, persistent whisper. The rain was not gone yet, But it was easing, breathing a deep sigh. The worst, the terrible culmination, was undeniably over. The judgment had fallen completely, washing the world clean until nothing remained of the old order except for 8 humbled souls and the meticulously preserved animals destined to repopulate a purified, brand new earth. And somewhere, hundreds of feet beneath the churning, gray surface of that vast ocean, Methuselah rested peacefully on a submerged hillside. He was the man who had lived 969 years, the living countdown clock that had finally and irrevocably struck zero. He was the end of mercy, necessitated so that the necessary judgment could commence. His monumental burden was finally finished. His count was complete. The world that would eventually emerge, sparkling clean when the waters finally drew back, would unknowingly be constructed upon the silent foundation of his unparalleled patience, his relentless endurance, and his 769 years spent acting as the solitary vital space between God's final warning and God's inevitable wrath. He was not merely the longest life ever recorded in history. He was the bearer of the most meaningful death imaginable. For the instant Methuselah finally closed his weary eyes, humanity's allotted time had completely run out. And when time ran out, the very floodgates of heaven opened wide. And when heaven opened, everything that was promised, the cleansing, the judgment, the renewal was sent, precisely as his profound and prophetic name had always foretold. If the weight of this ancient tale has resonated deep within your spirit, if it prompts you to view your own years, your own hours, through a different lens, if you now truly understand that every single breath drawn is an act of unmerited mercy and every morning is a gift of undeserved grace, we ask you to subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share this narrative with anyone in desperate need of hope. For the truth remains that we are all living on time borrowed from eternity. We are all, whether we realize it or not, participating in a solemn countdown toward an unknown destiny. The only enduring question left for us to answer is this: what monumental, lasting purpose will we find for the precious, limited time we have remaining?